July 16th meeting of the City of Port Angeles Council. And let's begin with the roll call, please. Mayor Brett, present.
Deputy Mayor Dexter. Here. Councilmember French.
Here.
Councilmember Kidd. Councilmember Meredith. Councilmember Moran.
Here.
Councilmember Sherman Warren.
Here.
Manager West.
Present.
Attorney Moore.
Here.
Thank you. So let's all rise for the pledge of allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
So I do know that Councilmember Meredith has asked to be excused. I know also that there is traffic and Councilmember Kidd is on her way to be able to get the phone in. So I would suggest that we begin by excusing Councilmember Meredith.
So moved.
Second. All right, any further discussion? All those in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, so Meredith's excused, and then we'll wait to see if Councilmember Kidd also, and I will excuse her as well. Also, before we go into public comment, I was wondering, we've got a presentation that's happening, and also folks who are here about the joint Homecoming EOC action, so moving those before the late items, something that's council. That's fine with me.
Yep.
Okay, just moving the presentation that we have by Mike Skinner and the discussion on the joint Homecoming EOC before we do the consent agenda and the late items. Okay. All right, so at this point, it is, we're going to move to the public comment period. So anybody in the audience who would like to speak to council on anything wrong, please step up to the mic, state your name, and whether you live in the city or not. And feel free to go. All right, do we have actually the sign-up list? Oh, it was not. Oh, hang on guys, just a second. It might be a list, and if there's no list, then it'll be a free for all. Okay, so we've got 4 people who have signed up. So the first one, Hillary Powers.
Hi everybody, my name is Hillary Powers and I live in Port Angeles. I am a supporter of the City of Port Angeles signing the Charter for Compassion. So let's break down the word compassion. Com means with or together, and in early Latin, passion stems from pati, which means to suffer together. So I do this weird thing often when I'm in a room full of people. I imagine everyone has their 5-year-old selves. The old bearded man with a scowl transforms to a smiling boy with a milk mustache. The quiet middle-aged woman becomes someone's little daughter who's looking for her parents' hands. I become that tree-climbing, grass-staying knees kind of kid. When I look around this room, I see not just city council members, blank faces, city workers, suits and ties, and tired people. I see a lot more. I see people who have overcome, humans who are here to create change, people who have dealt with more pain than I can even imagine. I see warriors and tender hearts. I see the innocence that still lives within us. This is living life through a compassionate lens. Compassion demands vulnerability. In a world full of fear and hatred, it's really hard to be vulnerable. We must take off our masks and begin tearing down the walls that we built that have protected our hearts since we were little. The great thing is this is a skill, and over time, we can get better. Compassion also asks for accountability. I'm aware enough to know that I'm a pretty decent person. I've done a lot of work on myself, but God knows I have a long way to go. I'll be the first to admit that I need a reminder to be compassionate for that crazy ass in that ugly PT Cruiser who purposely cuts me off in traffic. We aren't perfect, we mess up. Compassion creates community. There are 7.5 billion people in this world. If we were meant to do life alone, we'd all be on our own little planets like in The Little Prince. Recent studies even show that loneliness could be more of a health risk than smoking and heart disease. Compassion helps with our well-being. Generosity is one of 4 neuroplastic brain circuits that are linked to well-being. When we cultivate compassion, these neurocircuits strengthen and nurture a quality that has been in us for millennia. Hopefully, many of us here today are ultimately here to create a more beautiful future. Our youth are looking at us for answers. Our humanity is being stolen by greed and hatred and isolation. By signing the Charter for Compassion, we are showing the future generation that we stand for humanity, that we believe in togetherness. This has nothing to do with religion or politics, but just so you know, some of the most compassionate people in my life are Republicans and atheists. I keep hearing the word radical pop up in my realm. People keep talking about radical changes and radical solutions. Radical is Latin for root. We are being called back to our roots. We are being faced with what is inherent in all of us. If we aren't choosing our humanity, what else are we choosing? Let's become a radical community and commit to living a more compassionate life. Let's do it for the kids, let's do it for the now, for the future, and for each other. Thank you.
Thank you. Annabelle Wahlberg.
She is not here right now.
Oh, you are, hey. So just go ahead and state your name and what you live in the city.
I'm Annabelle Walton. I've lived in Port Angeles for as long as I've been alive. And when I heard about this Charter for Compassion, I immediately asked myself why people weren't signing it. Because, as Hillary stated, compassion means suffering together. And I don't know why people wouldn't want to be together in this community. Because compassion is the first step to building a happier and healthier community for everyone involved. It's the first step, it's the first building block in safety and organization. And it just struck me as odd that people would turn down something that seemed so positive, because we have a lot of problems in this town, and so many of them can be fixed with just a little more help, a little more empathy, a little more compassion. Yeah, that's what I have.
Great, thank you. We got Wesley Cotton.
My name is Wesley Lockman, and I live in Port Angeles. When I heard about the Charter for Compassion, I remembered all the times that I've been at the high school, at the college, and some student at both, and I've learned that people who have a hard time worse than time than I, and how they could have been benefited by just someone saying hello to them, or holding the door for them, or being a little kinder than normal, because they realize they need it. In a town where I'm often around different sets of life and different kinds of people, and I can proudly state that I haven't met one person that can't benefit from more compassion, one person that can't benefit from someone being a little bit kinder to them, or someone just taking the notice of them and looking for them who they are. Now I know that when we look at the Charter of Compassion, it can be related to religion or to a spiritual type thing. But myself being a religious person, I can proudly say that you don't need to be a religious person or a spiritual person to be kind to other people. And some of the most astounding things that comes to mind is that why do you have to be religious to serve other people? The Charter of Compassion just facilitates the ability to serve other people in their community and our fellow men and women at a broader level and a more personal level. I know that as a student, I see my peers that struggle with depression, anxiety, and family issues that are beyond anyone can fathom. And while I haven't experienced many great things like my peers, I have experienced some of those things. And I know that in those times of crisis, especially someone at my age, someone being kinder, showing a smile, or just doing a simple act of kindness and compassion, for me, really helped me through that. And I don't see why the community that struggles so much, or county struggles so much with suicide, and not wanting to sign something that would facilitate another thing that could help with that. We do have preventive measures for that, but at the core of it is people feeling like they're validated and people feeling like they belong and that they're worthwhile people to be around. And signing the Charter of Compassion would feel like that would help people my age be able to feel like they do belong part of the community because the community cares about them. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, Susan Hilger.
Hello, my name is Susan Hilgren, and I have taffy that's in the city. So I want to thank the city for getting my business license approved so we could open the thrift store when we did. We actually had 3 people donate furniture today that said it was going to go to the dump if we didn't take it. So we've made enough to pay our rent. I mean, rent's not real high, but so far we're doing good, so I appreciate that. And we're moving along on trying to get the ceiling in taffy so we can do a mini Oxford program upstairs. I'm working really hard on that. It feels like it's taking forever. So, and yeah, personal opinion on the the MAT program, medication assisted treatment. I had a son who was into drugs, and he did the Suboxone program for about 6 months. And it worked wonders. He's got 7 years and he's really successful. It's really important, but it doesn't work by itself. They have to make sure that these people are making sure they go to outpatient treatment, that they're getting education, that they're doing meetings. It's kind of like giving somebody a diet pill and then not expecting anything else. Well, if you don't change their eating habits and their physical habits, nothing is going to change. So we all need to stay on top of that because it really needs to work for everybody. Your friendly neighborhood cleanup people, they went and we have a guy I work with, Rob Bell, and he has a job, but he lives in the woods, and he had a friend at his camp. He was working that day, and they came along and took all his stuff, his new fishing pole and his wallet, everything. His friend was even there, and it was chained to a tree. It was obvious. His friend was there and said, at least let me take it for Rob, and no, they wouldn't. They threw it all away. This is not okay. So now, I don't know how I can do it, because I don't have a lot of time, but I certainly can figure out how taffy can hold on to stuff for people that go out and collect it. Now, I don't want your garbage they're collecting, but if you find a bag that's got important stuff, drop it off at Taffy, and I'll find who owns it, and I'll get it back to them. Because this is just not okay. Got a letter from a girl that was in jail. She needed help so she could get some stuff before she went to treatment. So I went to the jail and said, you don't even have to tell me that she's here because of your privacy thing. Tell me how to get a bag to her so she can get some hygiene. Couldn't help me at all. Couldn't help me. Now that's a silo. That's not working. If we want things to work, we've got to make it work for everybody. It really does. And I really appreciate this compassion thing because we are running short on it. And it's just so easy to do, just to be nice. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, and that is all we have signed in. So now, anybody else in the audience who would like to speak to council, please step up and state your name and whether you live in the city or not.
My name is Ingrid Kerming, and I do live in the city of Port Angeles. Being compassionate means actually taking compassionate actions, like putting in more wheelchair-accessible ramps on our sidewalks, like caring about our neighbors. We can do this. We can become a compassionate city. But as a community, we also have to disapprove of theft, no matter who the victims are. Recently, and Susan told you something about these two, I've heard of 2 acts of thievery. One, Susan told you mostly about that, where the thieves came and were going to take somebody's items, and a friend said, please let me keep them for them, and the thieves said no. They took all that individual's possessions. And the other, the young man whose childhood is such a nice nightmare, I'm surprised he's still able to function, had his fishing poles, which are his psychological relief, some money, and all of the rest of his possessions stolen. That included a GED study book, which I personally had bought for him to show him that I had faith in his future. You might have guessed that these two are homeless and they're living in tents. I heard that there are other campsites that are also being raided. Rents are high, very high. Purchasing a home is just totally out of the reach of these people. If we can vote on and pass a small increase in the sales tax, so the state would give us money for low-income housing, different types of housing, this would help. Someone suggested to me that we need to require those who wish to clean up an area to know the laws and register rather than just go and pick up anything they want to steal. So that we would know who they are and they would understand the difference between cleaning up an area and being thieves. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Anybody else who would like to speak? Yes.
My name is J. Michael Gonzalez. I live in Port Angeles. I just incorporated here in Port Angeles in the city and also in Washington for the Contractor State License Board. I brought up a very special military-grade solar paneling system that produces a little more than 1.5 times more than what's going on the roofs around the whole United States at this point, including California. I've noticed there's been a lot of problems with electrical. There's no gas lines over here. People using propane. There's a lot of situations with utilities, especially that expense that everybody pays for the electricity bills. That's outrageous. I just got here in August of 2018, and I've heard so much. I've seen so much. I've gotten involved, and it's been an uphill battle to get to this point. So I had a little meeting today, and my objective is to go ahead and try to take Port Angeles alone at this point and solarize it. Being able to go ahead and fight to make it proper and give a utility town back to the people that are able to go ahead and afford it. This paneling system is a flexible system. It's very thin. It doesn't even bolt on to the roof. It's actually adhered. Could adhere on a wall, could adhere anywhere. I've utilized a company called CRTC here that does carbon composites. And we have gone and designed a beautiful, beautiful system that right now we are trying to get out to the public. Tomorrow we have a mock-up that we're putting together, and we're trying to go ahead and produce this and let people be involved, because it's going to take a lot of people to do this. And I've heard in 2028 that a contract is up with the utility company here, and something needs to be done. And there's been options, and people have spoken about it. My idea from the very beginning coming up here, I found Port Angeles on Google Map. I wanted a certain place. I wanted to get out of California. It's 119 degrees when I left California. And I found this is the only place in the whole United States I could have gone anywhere. My father passed away. He was a retired judge. And I closed everything up, and I just came here. And this is the place, this is where I'm standing now. And now I have an office here, and I'm living here. I have 6 children. One is only here, the rest I sent back to California because we just weren't ready yet. So now I have children in Sacramento, and I got one here, for my oldest son. So I made him my vice president, even though he doesn't know what he needs to know to be a vice president yet. But I'm teaching him, he's just turned 20. So I wanted to go ahead and let everybody know that I'm here. My company's called Invicta Solar Systems.
Your time's up.
All right. That's it. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Is there anything else in the audience who would like to speak?
Hi, Brendan Meyer, resident of Port Angeles. I brought this up before, I just want to bring it up again because I think it's super important. The transparency in local government. I went out and spent 6.5 hours on Saturday talking to people on the street, Port Angeles residents, and it was, some people don't know what's going on, a lot of people don't know what's going on, and I know that we've had recordings of public meetings, we have audio versions of everything. Sometimes the mics work, sometimes they don't work. It's a bit of a rigmarole. And I know we've tried to have video recording before. recording it and putting it on Papa is like an antiquated way of doing it. And I think that for less than it would cost to replace a camera in Erickson Park, we could live stream all of our public city meetings and drive engagement from our community and knowledge and have a better informed electorate. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else in the audience who would like to speak at this time? All right, seeing none, let's move forward to the, to Mike Skinner, the presentation that he's going to give. It is an entrepreneur on-ramp program.
Okay, how you doing? Good to see you.
Make sure you got the card in case you've got questions. What's that, 5 minutes? 10?
Yeah, 1 minute, Mike.
Yes,
Is that here?
please.
I'm in favor of compassion, I can tell you that much. I love that.
Do you have a PowerPoint presentation?
I thought I did.
It's on this one.
Oh.
I thought you would.
Do I need to be at this podium to run it?
Yes.
And is it,
It's just kind of, yeah.
is it on?
There you go.
Oh, there it is. Cool. Let's see if I can figure out how to run this from the beginning. How about that? And this moves it forward and back. Okay, great. Hi, thanks so much for giving me an opportunity to present today. My name is Mike Skinner. I'm the founder and executive director.
Mike, can you speak into the mic, because I know this way you will be recorded. And it'll catch your voice, so you stand straight. You don't have to lean into it.
Is that good? I'm the founder and executive director of the Center for Inclusive Entrepreneurship. We provide first accessible and inclusive first step entrepreneurship training and support for typically low income and underserved people who are trying to start a small business to work themselves out of poverty and to find ways to contribute to the local economy and become community members and community leaders. And I'm here to talk to you today about a project that we're working on that I would like the city to consider supporting. And that is a project that we're calling the Entrepreneurship On-Ramp. So what this is a collaboration between Washington State University's Washington Small Business Development Center and the Center for Inclusive Entrepreneurship. And it's designed to expand the entrepreneurship ecosystem in Clallam and Jefferson counties by providing inclusive and accessible first step business training and support for emerging entrepreneurs and early stage small businesses, and providing an on-ramp to the North Peninsula Small Business Development Center for those who are ready to take their business to the next level. A problem in many rural communities is that there are a lot of people in the community who are thinking about a business but don't know where to start. And they need a little bit of help with those first steps. And with some help to take those first steps, some of them will find out that they really didn't want to do this thing and it won't work. But some of them will find out that maybe it could work with the right support and it can move something forward. For many, business ownership is a viable path to financial self-sufficiency. There's a lot of evidence that says that having a business asset is one of the most important ways to build assets in a family. And again, with some help with those first steps. Pardon? Comments? And there are currently very few accessible and inclusive first step business training programs that are supporting many rural communities across the country, really, but it's certainly true here in Clallam and Jefferson counties. So a possible solution, or one of many solutions for us to consider, is our Community Enterprise Program. We'll hire a full-time staff person, a business advisor. We're actually interviewing next week, so that's happening as we speak, who will do a lot of community outreach and go out into the far reaches of throughout the North Peninsula And I'm talking about places like Amanda Park and La Push and Hoh River and Nia Bay and Squim and Port Angeles and Port Townsend and Chimacum and Quilcene, and places that oftentimes maybe people don't go into. And be in those communities to catalyze and spark entrepreneurship. And then provide our First Step training program, and for those who complete the program, one-on-one business support to help them get a business started. It will be inclusive and highly accessible. Anyone is welcome into our program. And we don't tell anybody that they can't do it. They figure that out on their own by learning what we have to teach them. So it's, we're not a gatekeeper, we're really about what you can do, but we help them put that into business language. It's intentionally designed, by the way, to be an on-ramp to participants that are ready to go to the next level. So we have as an end game this thing called the Grow Ready checklist. And when you can check these 10 boxes off, you're done with me and you need to get over to, he used to be Kevin Holt at the Small Business Development Center, but you're ready for that next level. So that keeps us in our lane and allows us to integrate with already existing entrepreneurship support. I'll pause, questions? Additional comments, Jim? I think you've heard this about 3 times.
Sorry, Mike.
Our goal would be to launch 15 new businesses in the first year. Every year, we're going to try to reach 500 people, just through community outreach and activities and different ways to get people in a room to talk about the role that entrepreneurship and small business can play in the community. We'll get about 10 people a month through our training program. It's a 1-month, 4-week training program. And we'll provide over 1,000 hours of one-on-one technical assistance. At least 25 people will get 10 plus hours of intensive technical support and help to get a business launched, growing, and get them to that next level. This is a win for the community. More people will learn about and have access to entrepreneurship and small business training and support. It's a win for the local economy. More people will launch new businesses, get early stage businesses ready to grow, and be on a pathway to scale with SBDC support. Small local businesses will diversify and add resilience to the local economy. You need the big ones, and you need to do business attraction and retention and economic gardening for the existing businesses, small, medium, and large. But you also need to create a pathway for people who are just coming out with the first new idea. Really critical to do that for the strength of the economy. You need all sizes of businesses. It's a win for the North Peninsula SBDC. They're pretty excited about this for a lot of reasons. We'll do all of their outreach, so they don't have to leave the office. They can sit behind the computer, do financial spreadsheets and business plans, which is what they're supposed to be doing. We'll help them reach deeper into those underserved communities that they seldom see. I mean, they just don't have the time. There's one person for all of Clallam and Jefferson County, so you can imagine that's pretty hard to do. We'll allow them to leverage our hours and our outcomes for their goals, which will make them look really good to their funders. And we'll build a pipeline of more diverse, grow-ready small business development clients. Right now, the Small Business Development Advisor does all of that, in addition to the stuff he or she is supposed to be doing. And it's a win for us. It links us to a well-established and sustainable partner. I mean, who wouldn't want to partner with Washington State University and their Small Business Development Center program? It leverages, it allows us to leverage Wazoo and the SBDC business support resources for the benefit of our clients, which means these nonprofit microenterprise development programs oftentimes aren't very rigorous. This will really add to our rigor and the ability for us to provide really good, solid professional service. And it moves us from phase 1, which is things like ad hoc programs like our Coastworks business competition that we've been doing for 4 years, going on 5 now, to phase 2, which is an ongoing local training and technical assistance program based here in Port Angeles. And it presents opportunities to develop a model here in Port Angeles that we could scale to other rural communities in the state of Washington. I'm going to skip that, come back to that next. Just a little bit about us and why us. I grew up in a small log town. I went to law school. I worked on Wall Street for 5 years. I decided that I wanted to do something different, so I went off to Central America and learned about microfinance. And I've been doing this kind of work for 15 years. I designed this particular model that serves as an on-ramp to small business development centers and developed the proof of concept over 12 years now. Since our launch of this program in 2013, the launch of the Center for Inclusive Entrepreneurship, we've had 1,000 people go through our program. We've started 100 new businesses that have created over 120 jobs. If you multiply that by $50,000 in annual revenue on average per business, and then add the multiplier for local businesses, because money circulates many more times if it's spent at a local business than it would be if you spend it at, say, Walmart. That's a huge impact, more than offsets the cost of our program. We have strong local knowledge. We've been 5 years invested in the Peninsula now, on the ground, working with this CoastWorks initiative. I don't know if you've heard about the CoastWorks business competition, but it's become kind of a thing. And in some respects, I think it's sort of changing the narrative, particularly among younger people in the community who want to look at ways to stay in the community and without having to leave the community in search of economic opportunity. We have, through the CoastWorks initiative and through a couple other small things that we've been doing, we have over 90 clients that we're serving right now. And that gets hard to do with me in Seattle and my cohort down in, my coworker down in Olympia. So we need boots on the ground, someone local, someone here, 5 days a week, 9 to 5, doing this work. Through all of this, we've got a really strong network of local and trusted partners that I'm very proud of, and I think we can leverage those relationships in all kinds of ways to the benefit of people who currently aren't being reached. So going back a slide, how can you contribute? Our goal is to raise, Wazoo is putting up half the bill for this, for the first year, and their expectation is that they'll be able to continue that funding, providing the same model that currently exists for the Small Business Development Center. They pay half with federal funds, the other half is supported by non-federal local funding. So we need to provide our half. Our goal is $55,000. We're close to that. We're not there yet. We have enough of our own cash reserves that we're able to get the program started. So I actually have the keys to the office and actually set it up today. And we're hiring somebody, as I said. And we are moving forward with our pilot year. But we're still looking for more money. I'd like to be able to replace our cash reserves with some additional funding if we could. We're also looking for stakeholders to serve on an advisory board, and Allison, I'll be coming to talk to you about that opportunity. I know you probably serve on 100 boards. This will be another one. We're looking for community-based organizations, not just the economic development and business development partners, but also the community foundations, United Way, social service agencies. That's where we find a lot of our clients, and so we'll want to build a very robust referral network with referral partners from sort of all walks of life in the region. And we're always looking for volunteer trainers, people who want to get up in front of a group of entrepreneurs and talk about marketing or finance or accounting, as well as mentors. So these are all ways that you could contribute. So I hope you'll think about it. I know you're going into budget period in the next couple of months, and maybe there's an opportunity to help us. You would be joining the Port of Port Angeles, Clallam County, the City of Sequim, Evergreen Business Capital Foundation, Key Bank, and several others if you were to join in providing some financial support. In any event, whether you can help us financially or not, I certainly hope that I can look to the city to be a partner in these efforts. So again, I really appreciate your time. Are there any questions?
Not a question so much, Mike, as a comment. You're right. I've seen this. Your program for beginning entrepreneurs phase 1 I sat in on the original kickoff of that. It's where you can bring a business plan to these people and through competitive work, earn up to $10,000 to start a business. And so it's an extremely effective program. You're being a little bit modest, Mike, but you need to talk about some of the success stories we've had here actually in Clallam County and Jefferson County. One of the key things we talk about constantly is workforce development and the opportunity to get people employed. And here's an excellent training program that's extremely cost effective to get people not only on their feet, but doing something that they probably always dreamed of, and it's supported by Washington State University. Yeah, I know the NLTC is a big supporter of yours also, Mike, so
Yeah.
I thank you for the work you do, and I'm a big fan.
Thank you, Jim, I appreciate that. This is workforce development. Self-employment is employment. And moreover, even if you're not successful, if you go through this program and you start thinking differently about business and you learn sort of business literacy, if you will, you're gonna have a different appreciation for business. You might even, whether or not you move forward and start your own business, you might even become more entrepreneurial. And I can assure you that an employer is gonna wanna employ somebody who's entrepreneurial over someone who isn't. So this is, making people more effective in pursuing whatever goals that they pursue, whether or not they start a business. That's why we do it. We kiss a lot of frogs in this business. I would say 1 out of 10 will be successful in getting a business started. 9 will learn a ton, and some of those will say, thank you for talking me out of this crazy idea that would never have worked. And that's all good. Those are all positive outcomes. And we try to strike a balance. 1 out of 10 is about as low as I'd be willing to go. But the deeper we're reaching into the hard to serve communities, the lower that ratio goes, and we have to kind of strike a balance there. But we really want to be available to anybody that's got an idea. Bring it in. I'll tell you how to talk about it. You can figure out for yourself whether it's something you want to pursue. And if it is, well, get out of the classroom and get into the marketplace and start working on your idea in real time. That's how entrepreneurs learn. That's why they're successful. That's how we're able to do this with just 1 full-time staff person for the whole 2-county region. It's a pretty efficient program, a pretty good investment. I think a good return on investment for the people who are supporting.
I'm excited to hear about this program. I went to the Mayor's Conference for Entrepreneurship in Kansas City a couple of months ago and hadn't learned a lot about the real value of entrepreneurship and considering who already lives here in developing your economy and how a lot of the fastest growing cities or the cities that are considered thriving and doing well are the cities that have really focused on entrepreneurship. So I'm a big here. So
absolutely. And so you are the Homer Kaufman Foundation,
yes.
Which is the 10,000-pound gorilla in the entrepreneurship world.
Yes.
Kansas City is a banner to all communities around entrepreneurship. And I think you're so right. It's something that it's a lost art. I think if we're waiting around for somebody to hire us, that's a problem. We need to give people permission to go out and create your own day job. And that's what we do.
Thank you.
So, does anybody else have a comment? I wanted to tell you that we will be discussing later on this rural development initiatives. I don't know if you've heard about them, the RDI.
I was partly responsible for connecting them to Karen Affeld at NRDC through that grant, the READY grant.
So they'll be coming to Port Angeles.
Good.
In August, so August 26th or 29th.
Yes.
So we were going to try to put together folks who they needed to talk with, and so I'm glad to know that.
Yes, and RDI works on an initiative called WealthWorks, which is the model that our Coast First Business Competition was based on, which is all about triple bottom line, sort of the 8 types of capital, not just money and jobs, but all the other things that you need to create compassion, equity, well-being in your community. And we really want to bring that through a very strong social equity lens in partnership with Karen and the folks at NODC. So we're really excited about the fact that they're coming to town to help facilitate that process. They're the local WealthWorks hub for the West Coast states. And we need a WealthWorks hub in Port Angeles for the peninsula. And so that's sort of a dream of mine. So thank you for acknowledging that.
Just so you know, there's a chance that they'll be able to do their program here for 2 years and maybe help. And so somehow or other, I think we need to get all of these efforts together.
Excellent. I look forward to that.
Well, thank you for your presentation.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mike.
All right, so, agenda. Actually, so let's just take the joint Pentagon EOC options. So, Chief Dubuque, I believe you're starting that one, right?
Yes, thank you. So thank you, Mayor, Council. I'm going to start, I'm going to pass the baton to Chief Smith, and then we'll finish up with Manager West, if that's okay. So, as we stated in our memo that's before you tonight, both fire and police departments have work plan items that are directed at looking at options for a combined facility that will address the needs for an emergency operations center, EOC, and also for a potential alternative location for PENCOM, Peninsula Communications, which is the 911 dispatch center currently located in Parkland. And the reason why we are doing that is because, well, for a number of different reasons, but currently the county's emergency operations center, if you put a list together of all the places that you definitely don't want to have an emergency operations center, and then rank them from 1 to 10, they're all on that list. And the county, not for any fault of the folks that are there now, because this precedes everyone, is located in just not a great place. And for until just recently, there was difficulty even getting a cell phone coverage down there. So the county for quite some time has recognized the need that they would like to move out of that space, free up space. And the city has recognized that our emergency operations center over in the fire department is woefully inadequate as well. And both of our organizations have recognized for years that in the event of a fairly large incident of any kind, we're both fishing from the same pool for qualified people to run an emergency operations center for any length of time. So we realized that in the long run, really the best way for us to operate is probably to operate together and to operate out of a better, more purpose-built facility than the ones that we're in now. At the same time, I got in here for 20 years. When I arrived 20 years ago, one of the things in the fire department work plan was to establish a West End fire station. Well, it's been 20 years and we're not anywhere closer to that, but we definitely know we need to do that. We know we need to meet the WAC required response time standards to get to the West End. So one of the things we know we need to do is try to locate a fire station on the West End somewhere. And then for reasons that Chief Smith will go into, police department clearly needs space and PENCOM is clearly not in a good location. So what we're hoping to do is work collaboratively with the county to find a suitable location where we can have potentially a combined EOC, dispatch center, and fire station somewhere on the west side. So we went to council in February and we presented this to you and we asked for your blessing basically to move forward and do some due diligence to look at different locations that might meet some criteria that could fit. And we have done that. Chief Smith can go over some of the criteria we looked at that we used to evaluate some of the facilities that we looked at. And then he will also finish up with telling you what our preferred options are. You'll see in the audience that we have representatives from the Sheriff's Department, and you'll see from, I believe, school PD here earlier. So this is something certainly that is a big deal to everyone in the community. So I'll pass it on to Brian.
So, good evening, Mayor and Council. Just to back up a little bit to reflect on PENCOM. I've been here 11 years, and one of the things I heard about before I was hired was PENCOM and the great service it provides, and then the challenges of it being in a very small space and really no practical way to move forward. So 11 years, forward, we've, I think through this collaborative process, found ourselves some possibilities and some, potential to move forward. PennCom today provides 130,000+ calls for service in a year. We've got 25 employees that share space with 37 other police employees. It's about 6,000 square feet. We're in great shape in many ways. We're funded through our reserves to take care of what we call the inside part of PennCom. The software, the servers, the hardware. We're remarkably fortunate in that way. We're funded 40% from user fees and the rest through phone tax and sales tax. I would say we've got Carl Hatton, one of the best directors of a 911 center in the whole state. And we've got a lot of advantages, but some of our disadvantages, we don't have a simple and practical way forward, which is space is one of them. Space to grow, space to to regionalize, and also a work environment that would be suitable for people who spend more than half their adult life inside. Not the worst space of all dispatch centers, but certainly not. But in this joint effort, it's forced us to reflect on what would be important in EOC 911 Center and possibly Westside Fire Station. And so going through our list, and it's what we collaboratively put together, survivability appeared to be the #1 thing if you're going to move into a new space. Earthquake survivability, survivability in terms of resupply, that you would still be standing, you'd still operate after a major event. And the ability to leverage your project, whether it's fire station, EOC, or 911 Center, or other projects. Interested parties who might want to participate. You have, the sum is more than just the separate parts. So by leverage, we could actually accomplish something that individually we wouldn't be able to accomplish. And then cost effectiveness, in looking at any potential move for a 911 Center by itself, Carl and I have had a lot of conversations about this. We don't see a clear path forward just going off by ourselves. It doesn't appear to be a simple and achievable path forward financially. But if we combine ourselves with EOC and a fire station, there's lots of potential out there. So that's roughly the framework, and we added some other criteria. You read the memos, but really the first three, if you can't get past the first three in our framework, it would be hard for us to realistically move forward in some joint effort with the county. The last thing I'll say about this is, the fire chief's not an architect as far as I can tell, and I'm certainly not one, but we have between us a lot of professional experience in this business, and we've worked in different environments. In my previous job, I was part of the creation of a new 911 Center that really I was just along for the ride because people knew what they were doing, made it happen. And the same thing with the courthouse project. But you learn things about how these things can go, and I think we've, in terms of following council's direction here, learned quite a bit more to learn. And we, of course, have a lot more to talk about this and look forward to questions as well.
So Council, I want to thank Chief Smith and Chief Dubuque for getting back to council and staff with an update and basically reporting back on what they found with the study that they undertook. I think it's most important that they actually followed through with what council asked them to do. They took the time to evaluate all the sites that we're aware of within the community with some really good criteria. And I think that has a lot of value at the end of the day. I think it's extremely important too, though, that as we pursue moving forward with a new PennCom facility and an EOC facility, that we do so with a solid foundation. And I think it's extremely important that we build a solid foundation both of partnership as well as long-term interest, that make sure we have that long-term predictability for those services, for emergency services, for PennCom services, making sure that we have that predictability for the agencies involved with PennCom, but also for those agencies' ratepayers. I think that's extremely important. Staff ultimately is following that direction from February, where council said move forward with looking at and evaluating these sites. And staff's come back with some options, and I think it's really important to point out what some of those options are. And so right now, the three options that you see in your memorandum would be first to identify a preferred site and direct staff to move forward pursuing that site. That's one option. A second option would be to direct staff to discontinue the effort if council decides you don't like the sites, you don't like the way things are going. And then thirdly, direct staff to move forward with looking at alternative sites if those sites aren't acceptable. I think it's extremely important too that whichever option you select, that I don't want council making a decision with hesitation. I think these services are far too important. These are the most essential services that we as a city provide. People have needs that are emergency related and we need to be responsive. We need to make sure we have done this right. And so I would not want council moving forward with hesitation. I think too, it's important to look at some of the options available to us. If you look at what's evaluated in the report, I think one of the standout properties, the one that scores the highest, is the Port Angeles property. And that's a good site relative to what the needs are from a space perspective. It's certainly a good option. But I think it's really important too that we're making sure that we've done our due diligence relative to that site, that at the end of the day, we are taking an approach that as partners with the county, that we are absolutely a part of those negotiations on how we were to select such a site, on what it looks like for the long term, particularly for PENCOM, but also for the Emergency Operations Center, and make sure there's equity in that partnership. Not from a dollar perspective, but equity in that partnership from the way we treat each other, making sure that we're equal partners at the table as we're having those discussions. I think too, that there's many options on the table, but we do need to address some of the long-term challenges that we're currently facing in both PENCOM and our police department, the challenge that the county has with operating out of the basement. And I think this is a starting point for a good council discussion. As we move forward though, I think we're going to talk about some next steps. We're going to talk about next steps relative to negotiation. Most importantly, we're going to talk about next steps relative to both capital budget and operating budget to make sure there's predictability for the PENCOM agencies and ultimately the ratepayers.
Thank you for that. Hi, Council. So this has been a really interesting ride on this one. So any comments or questions that you have for staff at this moment?
So thank you for the presentation, the evaluation of the different facilities. I appreciate it. I generally agree with the overall framework and the idea of working together with the county. I joined the EOC, coupling that with PENCOM, also making sure we couple that into the merger with Jefferson, GenCom, and the co-location of all those facilities. Also the idea of a west side fire station, potentially maybe a branch police office. This concept makes sense to me. One of the things I remember learning in my first wilderness first responder course was go slow, go fast. Make sure you package your patient well so you're not stopping all the time while you're evacuating them to fix things. And so here I think we're in a situation where we should go slow, go fast. We should make sure that we get this right so we don't have to redo it. And we should look at the overall cost of the facility, not just the cost up front. So I recognize in the scoring criteria on page I-13 that Port Angeles 1010, the 1010 building, the 1010 building is scored at 35. The two city properties on basically the northwest corner or the northeast corner of Lincoln Park are scored as 31. The differences are cost effectiveness, where the 1010 building gets a 5 and the other two over at Lincoln Park get 2s. And I think capital outlay, where the 1010 building gets a 3 and the city properties over at Lincoln Park get 1s. I would like more information about how those numbers came about, because when I crunched the numbers just based on the report says that we'd be looking at an initial lease of for the 1010 building of 115,000, I think. Yes, 115,000. So if we look at that over, say, 50 years, we're talking about 5,750,000. We also are looking at the 1010 building having an initial, it says estimates are 1 million for a new EOC and 3 million for a new dispatch center. So when we add all that up and making the huge assumption that the lease cost stays the same over 50 years, that's basically $10 million for that location, which is about the same as what we estimate in the report for the 2 buildings that are at Lincoln Park. The report says that we'd be looking at 10 to 12 million to kind of start fresh. One of the other things that I'd like more information on is the report emphasizes the value of a purpose-built building, which to me is more built from the ground up with a purpose rather than retrofitted and renovated. When you renovate and retrofit, you're dealing with compromises based on the existing structure, and you're also running into unknowns too in terms of the cost and what's going to go in there. So those are some of the questions I have at this point.
Well, I'd like to comment on your crunching with numbers, if I might. First of all, I also crunched the numbers at length using my little handy little HP. For those of you who don't know what this is right above an abacus.
Yep.
So anyway, here's how the numbers really work out. If we were to build a building at $12 million, if we could finance that at 4% interest, either bond or mortgage, the monthly payment on that would be $46,837 monthly. If the lease payment is $115,000 a year, which works out to be $9,500 a month, if we divided it just equally among the county and the city, we would be paying $4,700 a month. If we took the difference between $48,000 and $4,000, or even $9,000, and just put it away in the bank for us, we would come up with about $158 million over the 50-year life of the mortgage. The mortgage also, the property would not have cost us $12 million. It would have cost us almost $28 million because of interest payments. It's a real easy calculation, present value, future value, and it comes to what the future value is. You multiply the monthly mortgage rate times the number of months that you're paying that mortgage, and you come up with the amount of money that the house, home, building, whatever, costs you. And that's the real cost that we're looking at, not $12 million. So even if we took a renovation cost of $3 million and added that in there and amortized that over a 50-year period, it would not come up close to $48,000 a month. So therefore, looking at the new construction versus renovating a building, taking the existing lease option and using that for whatever reason, at the end, remember, at the end of the lease term or at the end of the mortgage term, we have a 50-year-old building. A 50-year-old building that we do not pay $12 million for, a 50-year-old building that we paid $30 million for. And we have no money in the bank, whereas if we took the difference between the lease payment and the mortgage payment and saved that, even at a modest 4% interest or 3% interest, we'd have over $150 million. Those are large figures. So the reality of a cost analysis is taking the cost of renovation, adding it to the, and amortizing it over the cost of the lifetime of the lease, adding that up, comparing it to the cost of building a brand new structure, and then having to finance that. Remember, when you finance something, i.e. a mortgage or a bond, interest is now working against you. It is not working for you. And so I don't see how this option of the 1010 building can make anything but financial sense from every aspect of it. It's not, you're not comparing apples and apples when you say it's 12 million versus 12 million. What it is, it's 12 million compounded over a 50-year period, paying the interest on top of that versus the lease payment and taking the difference between the lease payment and the mortgage payment and investing it or saving it or using it for whatever other purposes. But if you just crunch the numbers and again, you took the present value of $12 million, future value 0, and added a 4% interest rate on that, you'll find out that your monthly payment is in excess of $45,000 a month. That's not something that I don't think we can compare to $9,000 a month. And even, again, if you took the cost of renovating the building, added that into the lease payments, and amortized that over a 50-year period, the numbers are not even close. So that's really how the numbers crunch out and how they should be looked at.
Council might add, just not to take away from Council Moran's explanation, but in terms of an assessment from Chief Dubuque and I, looking at an existing building that's got, say, good bones, that meets their needs as we see it right now, has some utility value to us that new construction might require us to have to pursue a temporary space for PennCom over, say, a 10-year period while we work on this other project or something like that. Again, those are subjective findings based on where we are right now. But also on numbers, $115,000 a year is a $90,000 lease with estimated utility payments from it. And that's my clerical error in the memo where I mixed them together. So the lease, as a proposed lease, is 90, and then utilities are added to that. If that matters.
And how will the lease change over time?
So that would depend on, again, if you're asking us what's negotiated, what collaborative result would come back to council. I mean, that depends on what the joint effort, what the result is.
We might have that information because we have John Nutter here, who might be able to answer that directly right now.
Before we go there, but let me just say, we've held up our negotiations.
Guys, before you start, if you need to talk, we have to be on a mic. And the question is, are we done? Are we ready for more input, or do we still have more questions?
I mean, I have things that I'd like to point out, but I'm fine with letting them have a little order.
Well, a few other questions then before we get more of a presentation, hopefully, is what is the purpose of that building and that space there at the port? Why is it sitting vacant? What's the long-term plan for it? And then, what was that one? I forget.
I have a couple comments, more than questions at the moment.
So let's hold on for just a little bit, and then after that.
So a couple things that are important to me in moving forward, which I think is the intention, but I feel like it's important to say it, is that if we decide to move forward on a building that we're leasing, that it is a lease that is with the organizations as a unit, not a daisy chain. For example, just that the city has a joint EOC agreement with the county and the county has the lease with the port. That's not what I want. What I want to see is the county and the city have a joint EOC, whoever else needs to be involved in that, that's the lease. They're joint lease holders, not a daisy chain. That's a critical piece for me in looking at a lease. I mean, certainly ideally, I would love to see us own the property, but I'm, at this point, willing to accept the preliminary numbers that make building something seem pretty prohibitive. And so, anyway, those are my two main thoughts about the big picture and how I move forward.
All right.
So I think, just to reiterate, I think we're all interested in collaboration, we're all interested in co-location. So I think that there's been some good work that's been done in that, original report, and then, the due diligence that was given to us. I think it's all very good. So to back on to one of the things that Lindsay said, is my understanding is that current port location, its original purpose and primary purpose is economic development. One of the issues that I have as a city council person is too large of a percentage of our taxable land in the city is occupied by federal, state, county, or nonprofits that don't really pay, full taxable land base that we otherwise could have. And so using land correctly and strategically matters to me. When we as a community have made sizable investments in specific areas and buildings to make them ready for economic development, it's not the highest best purpose for a government agency to come in and take that lease. That's not an overriding objection that I have. It's just something that I think we should all acknowledge, and to say that, government agencies are not economic development in that sense. We want private sector development to happen in places where we have invested community tax money to make private sector developments happen. We've certainly had a good, robust discussion already about the cost effectiveness of leasing versus new construction. And, I think one of the assumptions that sometimes we make is that, we as a council have said we're not interested in incurring new debt. And so when we're talking about new construction, I think we would have to be pretty creative about how that would happen. And I think that grant opportunities do exist for constructing new public safety capital facilities. It's really unlikely that grant opportunities exist to pay rent payments. And so that's a piece of the puzzle that I'm wrestling with still, that, it is really ideal to me, especially when you're talking about something that is the fundamental basic thing that local government does. It's really hard for me to introduce risk in ownership to that facility. This is the one thing that we need to do for our citizens to make sure that they are safe and secure. And so it really is ideal to me that we own a location. That being said, that port facility is well positioned for everything that we need. So I'm open-minded, but that's where I'm at right now.
So I do too also have some questions, because the report does talk about the Port Angeles Police Department being currently located in a facility that was not purpose-built, doesn't meet the standards for offender processing, handling, or interrogation, and also in addition doesn't provide the efficient evidence processing, evidence storage, or records management space. So it made me think that if we wipe the slate clean and say, okay, what would be the ideal then? Would it be ideal to have a building that has the EOC for the county, for the city, PENCOM, GENCOM, police, and fire at the west end? Or somewhere, because the fire station needs to be located at the west end for efficiencies. Or maybe just even a part of the police. It just seems like that would be probably our idea. So then, like I said, starting with a blank slate, we start with what we really ideally would like. Then we can start looking back and saying, okay, currently, is there, because I was looking at the report and I realized some of the properties have already been empty and now they're full and therefore not available. Well, that's also potential to look for a building that suits all our needs and ask, hey, you mind if we take this over? Maybe we can find you guys a different location. So I don't think we need to be limited by the fact that the building is empty or full. And I think we have limited ourselves to look at only vacant properties or vacant lots. So I think that that's a mistake. Especially if we're going to go, we're not likely to do this again in the next 25 years once we move. So let's look for the absolute ideal and see if we can meet that. Then the next thing, it's true about that we talked about not wanting to go into debt. So this financing, I would absolutely not want to go into any debt. So whether we end up with grants or we find some creative way to finance new construction, I think that would be ideal. because then it is something that we get to design for the purposes to meet everybody's needs. So that, I think, like I said, for me, that's the ideal. So I feel like we've done part of homework. I really appreciate the looking into the properties that were available at that time, but I don't think we have looked at the ideal location or even the ideal design of what we want. I mean, do we want the police to be in part of this building? If our current building doesn't meet what we need, does it make sense to add the police in there? So I would say, let's answer that question first. Then, you know, what's the size of the fire station that's gonna have to be on the east side? What's that size? Do we know now how much it's gonna take to operate that? And, you know, there's a lot of questions I feel like are still needing to be answered. I really appreciate this first step because this is exactly what we've asked. But I think we still have more work to do to get us further. So, yes, Jim.
I think if you're going to go down that route, then you're going to have to change the criteria we've given the Emergency Operations Center and the Police and Fire and PENCOM. If we look at the criteria that we agreed on, I thought, survivability, cost effectiveness, and so forth, the first three, as Chief Smith enumerated, that's the ideal location. Now, if you think about what goes into an emergency operations center and what's the ideal location, if we have a 9 quake, this place becomes an island. What's the most probable place on this peninsula that's going to have survivability during that? And that's the airport. It's built on bedrock. And so what would be the ideal location of getting emergency services in? The airport. What would be the ideal location to have all our resources co-located? That's the airport. And so we need to have these agencies not only co-located but codependent on each other and being able to support each other in an area that is going to be survivable in this massive earthquake. And in addition to that, the most cost-effective way of doing it for the city. And I'm sorry, but new construction still is going to, you know, we're not going to get a $12 million grant to build a new operations center. It's just not going to happen. And so we're going to have to finance some of this. And so if you look at the multiplier effect, just at current interest rates, versus, you know, even financing half or 2/3 of it, you wind up paying 2, 3, almost 4 times the amount of money for a building that now is 50 years old and obsolete, when we have the opportunity to move into a structure that has satisfied the criteria that the professionals say we need to have to survive during a major disaster and be able to provide our citizens as quickly as possible the resources that they need to survive themselves this catastrophe. That's why the operations center in the courthouse is not the courthouse is built on a trestle. There's a Peabody Creek that runs underneath it. You know, in an earthquake, that thing is down in the bay. So again, I can't emphasize enough. Unless you want to change the criteria that you want to use to select an emergency operations center, then this chart is very pertinent. It answers the questions that it needs to answer. And there is no need to finance something when, you know, we're talking about 4 or 5 times the amount of money on a monthly basis. And I don't think that's fiscally responsible to the citizens of this city just because we want to have our own piece of property and design it our own way. When we have the opportunity to move into a building that's structurally sound, it's in an area that will survive any catastrophe that happens, and we have all our resources pooled where we can can avail ourselves of them as quickly as we need them. So from a financial standpoint, from a survivability standpoint, from a cost-effective standpoint, they have brought to us answers to those questions, and I appreciate that. The only thing, the next step for me would be to see what a capital budget would look like for renovating that building, and an operating budget would look like for running the building. That to me, and then before we get to that point, then I would like to see us in partnership with the county negotiate a lease with the port and see how that lease arrangement comes back. So the next step is work out a lease where we're equal partners, then develop a capital budget to renovate the facility, and an operating budget to know what it's going to look like. And so we have the lease, we have the finances in place. We know through a cost analysis that this is the most cost-effective way to go, in my opinion. And I crunched them out. I just re-crunched them to make sure my numbers weren't off. And again, $46,131 to finance a $12 million building a month. $27,678,642 is the total cost of that building. The total cost of the lease payment over the 50 years would be, you're right, Lindsay, would be $5,750,000. Those numbers are too stark for us not to pay attention. Again, I can't emphasize enough that those financial numbers, in conjunction with the criteria that were offered to make this decision, make it compelling, in my opinion.
Before we make a decision, do we have all the information out? Because I know that some folks in the audience from the county report were willing to share more. And Jim's comments are very compelling, but I want to make sure we're making this decision with all the information on the table.
Just really quickly, I agree with Lindsay, and I think that, when we talk about those assumptions in our scoring matrix, 3 properties really fit the criteria, and that is on survivability, leverage, location, and site security. They all scored 5s with the 18th Street property, the 16th Street property, and the Port of the PA 1010 building. So just on that grounds, we don't have just one option when we're talking about location, site security, survivability, and lifespan. And actually, our properties score better on lifespan. I totally agree with you that we need to be fiscally responsible because we are talking about ratepayers and taxpayers. And so I'm definitely willing to hear. I have some other things that, when we do talk about those lifetime costs of leasing versus construction, it's really important to make fair assumptions. And I don't think it's a fair assumption that we will be paying $90,000 a year in rent 20 years from now. If we did, that would be a good, one of the other points I was going to make is if we do move forward with the port facility, there's not just one option as far as negotiations. One option is asking for ownership of the property. And that's something that the port would have to seriously consider for the county to own it or the city to own it fee simple, or to have really ironclad lease terms that include in-kind, such as fire support with a Westside Fire Station. But I'm willing to hear what the county and the port has to say.
I have a couple comments and questions, but I wrote them down, so let's hear it from everyone and then we can continue the
So
conversation.
if you guys want to get on the microphone and fill in some of that information, which we're looking.
And we know who you are, but you should probably say who you are, so in the recording, we know who's talking.
Bill Benedict, Clallam County Sheriff, and what I want to address are 2 direct things, and that has to do with some pre-existing properties that we studied. One of them was the Skills Center, one or both of those buildings. I would say that with the negotiations that went on during this study and after it was finalized, we need to take that out of the equation. The school district has indicated unequivocally that they have other plans and they've moved forward with those plans substantially. I would also throw up the fact is that they are vacating the building right across the street from both of our facilities, and that might play into some future things. So that property is out. As far as the lease thing, I'd like to have Mr. John Nutter come up and comment where we are in the negotiations. We've been going back and forth, and I'll say this, initially our guidance was that the city of Port Angeles essentially wanted to be a sublessee. It's very exciting to me to hear that you don't want to be, and you want to be in this as co-equal partners. It's always been my goal that we go into this essentially 50-50, and we merge those responsibilities. But it's my understanding as to where the lease is now, is that it essentially starts at 50 cents a square foot per month, which is about $7,500 a month for the 15,000 square feet. There's COLA adjustments to that. There was another 2% a year kicker forever that I think that we negotiated out. But anyway, I don't want to steal John's thunder, but I would like him to come up and at least say where we are right now with the unilateral or if you're bilateral discussions with the county and the port. Or would you like to go first?
I would.
I'm sorry, I've just been vetoed.
So again, I think everyone understands when we talk about health and safety of all the citizens, this ranks right at the top for anything any of us in government have to think about. Number two, the whole issue of lease with the port, and the reason why I came up, I put a stop on our negotiations. Our lawyer had gone through it because after discussing this with Nathan, knowing that you were looking at all the alternatives, it was made very clear to me that there's a possibility that we could jointly go forward, and jointly means that we all get involved in what the negotiations are, what we're looking at relative to the lease with the port. I will say again, the port's been very accommodating about talking about whatever issues we may have where we might go. But again, I've stopped it for right now until we kind of get a direction about where we might go jointly, if that's in fact a possibility. So right now they're held in abeyance, and I think John's been aware of that, and maybe Bill was not aware of that, but I mean, we've held up until you all make a decision about what makes a lot of sense. Number three, we went through financial numbers a little bit different than what Jim's were, but being quite honest, the lease versus buy decision comes up to a very, very large number. And then number four, and I'll just say that, when we as county commissioners sat down to look at our capital priorities the other day as an interim step when we were talking about strategic use of capital, EOC came up at the very tip top for all of the commissioners. I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Good evening, John Nutter, Port of Port Angeles. While I'm not authorized to speak on behalf of the port, I can share some of my personal observations here. I can say that any kind of lease, especially a long-term lease, normally comes with negotiated terms. So there have been some very good questions asked this evening, such as what would a rate escalator look like? I can say most often those escalators are a CPI, West Coast, all ordering consumers, CPI just gets published once a year by the Bureau of Land Statistics. In a recent negotiation with Clown County PUD, another municipal organization, we set that at CPI with a maximum ceiling of 2.5% a year. So even if CPI was 4 or 5 or 6, we put a ceiling on that to provide some surety for both organizations. There's a lot of unknowns here, and right now the port is trying very hard to just be a good community partner. As was pointed out by Councilman French, this is not what the port does for a living. This is not our mission. By RCW, our charge is economic development of taking public resources and private industry to create jobs. But we looked at the 1010 building with a little bit different lens. We said, this is something unique and this is something special where we need to work with our community. If we have the asset that helps everybody work together to be in the right location to do the right thing, then maybe we need to put our personal mission aside to be a good community partner. And so, as the director of real estate for the port, I'm perfectly fine if we don't lease to the county and the city. Now, personally, I like it because I think it's the right thing to do. But with my business hat on from the port, I can probably find a tenant that's going to pay me more money for that space. And yes, are we tying up space that could be used for economic development and business economic growth?
Yes, we could, probably, but it's only 15,000 square feet out of 93,000 square feet in that building. And I can tell you from, again, putting my business hat back on, it's 15,000 square feet of office space within a 93,000 square foot industrial production facility that is made for manufacturing. Am I gonna find a manufacturer that needs that much office space? Probably not, but I very well might. But I just wanted to share that from the port perspective, we're looking at this as a community partnership thing to do. It's not what we do, it's not what we exist for, but we see it as the right thing to do. And I'd be happy to take any questions.
I just really appreciate those comments, that's helpful.
Thank you.
Thank you.
A couple of thoughts.
Excuse me, John, go quick. The terms of the lease are, is a 50-year lease, plus 10, right?
As it has currently been proposed, but again, this is all in negotiation.
Yeah, I understand.
We started in a place where the discussion got started at a very high level, and I was asked a very simple question. I was asked, what would a lease look like? Not necessarily what would the final one look like, but just what would a lease look like? And so I just took our general template, I threw 50 years on it, and I said 50 cents a square foot, and that's what I provided the county. The county's asked some very logical questions. Well, we need a different terms for an out. We're not gonna invest $3 million in a building and have a 90-day risk out that we're gonna get kicked out of it. Well, of course, we need to talk about that and figure out a mutual solution to that. So I'd love to be able to answer very specific questions of what's this and what's that and what's that. I can't do that today. I need to sit down with whoever the players at the table are going to be, whether it's the port and the county or the port and the city of Sequim and the county. I don't know who's going to be at the table yet, but I'm just saying I hope to be able to work with everybody to find a mutual path forward.
And that's why I think the next step is really to start getting into some specifics as to how the lease would look, like escape clauses, if you will, that what I defer to the lawyers on about that. But if this is eventually going to make sense, then it's a combination of finance and lease arrangements. Really, in my opinion, I think again I go back to my original statement. I think it satisfies the criteria we have set forth on what survivability and so forth it needs. So now the next step, again, in my opinion, is to find out what specifically the lease is going to look like. Then, if we can't even get past that, then the finances are immaterial.
I have a couple of, well, I do think, first of all, I want to thank Randy for slowing down the process in recognition that this may look a little bit different than originally anticipated. So I appreciate that. I think one thing that, going back to Mike's comment about highest best purpose for this building and whether it meets economic development, it occurs to me that potentially having that site located in that spot encourages economic development in that area more than there is currently because of access to fire response times, et cetera. Just a thought while I was sitting here. And I know I said that, my first choice would be that we own it. I also think we've spent a lot of time talking about the fact that we can't afford more infrastructure. And while this is infrastructure, not owning it provides some level of, I think, security in, and doing it jointly. So I think that's valuable too. I do think that we set forth some criteria. We agreed on criteria at the very least. And the staff who will actually be doing this have come back and said this building best meets the criteria. So I'm okay at this point saying that I trust that the people who are involved in this know what they're doing, know what they're talking about, and have decided that this makes the most choice. And I think it's important to remember that even if we decide to move forward with agreeing to explore the options of the 1010 building, what we're saying is let's talk about it, not let's sign a lease tonight. I think that we don't want to get ahead of ourselves. And actually from a process standpoint, I question whether we might not be putting the cart before the horse and even discussing that piece. I don't know exactly, but a question that comes to my mind is, does it make sense for us to sort out a joint EOC agreement before we do a lease, or if those can be separate, if they're not mutually exclusive, then I don't have a problem saying let's explore them both at the same time. But that's just a process question I have for staff, I guess.
So council, I would suggest that that's probably not a prerequisite step that would be necessary. I think relative to the joint EOC, I think that's probably something that could be worked out in the future, recognizing that the city's principal interest is probably ensuring that we have a long-term home for PennCom. And that would be the number one priority. I think that we have seen good demonstration over the years of good cooperation between the county and city EOCs working together, and I think that's going to continue whether there's a new agreement for that or not.
Okay. Thank you for clarifying that.
One of the things that, one of the things that I'd like to see, because again, let's just get down to what we really need. So what is the square footage we need for the new fire station? What is the square footage that we need for police, if police is even, I mean, like I said, if our current building doesn't meet a lot of things and it's not suitable for the police today, and even with a space emptied by PennCom, is that the right place for you? And do, you know, like you said, you talked about it not being, it did not meet the standards for a lot of things. So would we be renovating our existing building, this PennCom space, to meet your needs, or would, and is that sufficient to allow you for growth the next 25 years? Or do we actually want to be able to give you some space in this new building?
So Mayor, I can address some of those things. Looking at the ideal for the police department as a whole, all 62 people was beyond the scope of this exercise. But it would be irresponsible of me not to pursue an option that at least addresses PennCom. And in pursuing that option, we would account for some increased capacity in our existing police department. So, I mean, in the world that I live in, it's pretty good, not the ideal that I live in. I live in a world that's pretty good. What's attainable? What can we afford? What can we leverage? And so that was how Chief Dubuque and I approached this, not approaching this on the ideal. Bainbridge Police Department are moving into a $22 million facility, this repurposed building. Under Sheriff Cameron and I talked to that architect that knows a lot about project management, and there's reasons that building, it's got a co-located court facility, costs that much. I don't see that as something that's attainable for us in this environment. So we talk about leverage, leveraging other people's capital, other people's grant opportunities, other people's interest, other people's commitment. Those are really complicated things, or legs of a table, and the legs can fall off and come back on, but the employees that I'm responsible for directly would be very happy if we expanded our existing police department, did some renovating, and had some of our problems addressed, because we put 25 people in a more suitable space. That would get us very far down the road to where we're trying to go. Now, what won't get us anywhere is if we wind up where we're kind of back to where we started from. And so obviously Chief Dubuque and I are looking to provide some specific answers to questions. And that was also beyond the scope of this, being able to specifically say, as John and I said, what is it versus what is, the generic. We're still at about, 10,000 feet right now. But the idea of being able to talk specifically about one thing, I think Chief Dubuque and I would be very interested in being able to have the opportunity to look at with our partners and to be able to report back.
And I kind of find that that's pretty critical if we're saying that we found a building that's going to be suitable, when we don't even know yet how much square footage, we're going to need for each.
We do know that.
Oh, okay, so
So
much?
it's actually in your report, and I'm not, no disrespect, but the undersheriff, when we surveyed stuff, we can tell you that based on industry standards, what it looks like. What a fire station looks like, what a typical 911 looks like, I could walk through that's not hard to come up with. Matter of fact, we could distill what we got there in front of you down to what normal best practices is for a place with, let's say, 8 consoles, and offices, and, I mean, it's all, that's,
And I know that they said here, you've got a couple of things that are, you do talk about square footage as to some of the space that's available, but I guess, maybe, forgive me if I missed it, because I was actually looking for specifically how much does the PENCOM space that you're gonna need, exactly what is that space that you're
so
looking
a common dispatch center, EOC combination is 8,000 to 10,000 square feet, based on what we looked at. It depends not necessarily on, like if you're building it, you're going to be more precise. If you find existing space, you can be less precise. But the 15,000 square foot, like the one that's on the table, it would, again, not being an architect, but having 37 years experience in this and having been part of building one 911 center, we would, between a fire station, EOC, and a 911 center, and say some other partners, we would use up that space responsibly. That matches typically what you see in floor space for 911 centers, when you can expand and contract, when you have a co-located EOC where people can move. But we can get you more precise, like there's a range. It doesn't have to be, but we're way below the range right now. We're in our 6,000 square foot building, and our, thousands, whatever square feet with offices included.
Can I ask it a different way?
Yes.
So if we were to build this, hypothetical $12 million whatever building that has all these co-located service places, generally, how many square footage would we build?
Look at the back of the county report. You see some examples. It's way in the back, but you're at 8,000 to 10,000 square feet.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, but that would not include the fire station space, and that may not include some of the expandable police space that would make you that much more effective. And I guess that's what I'm saying, it's like, okay, so what is it, what's the space that we want? I mean, right now, we're shoehorning our current program into this building that we have. And that's one acceptable way of looking at it, but I would like us to start shifting the motion a little bit and say, okay, what do we need? And then if we say we only need 8,000 to 10,000 square feet, but that's just for the EOC and PENCOM, not including fire, so what do we need for fire? Who do we need for police records or stuff? What does that look like? And maybe it is 15, that's great, but maybe it's 18. Or maybe it's 20, I don't know. And we've got to think about the longevity of this building. If it's going to be with us for 50 years, what's a 50-year growth? It's great that we can move into this building and it fits us just fine now. But if in 10 years we're going to be cramped and tight because we've grown and we need more space, this was not a good investment. So I want to see that long-term vision of designing this so that it's appropriate for us and gives us a little wiggle room to be able to grow. So I appreciate it. I think this was a great beginning step. I think we need to start answering how much space do we really want for each of these things that's going to grow with us for the next 50 years. I know we can only guesstimate, but let's even do that exercise of guesstimating how much space we're going to need for the future.
Two somewhat contradictory comments. One is, if we're planning this for the 9.0 earthquake scenario, let's make sure there's a room full of 30 days worth of food for all the personnel who's going to be there, and spaces outside for people to be sleeping, because nobody's driving around for at least a month after that earthquake. So let's make sure we plan appropriately for that. It's not just an office space where people are going to be going home afterward. And then the second thing is that's only one of the potential mass disaster scenarios that we could be planning for or should be planning for. And I'm not entirely sure if this really is just a communication center that we want to survive an earthquake and tsunami, why it needs to be up by the airport if all it is a communication center.
So we could certainly talk to you more about how emergency operations work. Again, all due respect, but the information that exists, you know, where people are, what things are, that lives in the servers and the software and the knowledge of the people that receive the calls. The emergency operations center is the place, the people that are running the larger operation. The airport is how you get supplies and things in and out. So it typically fits best practice in, you know, all risk management to co-locate 911 centers and EOCs together. Now, if you just have an EOC, you run the risk of having people working, but their access to information in both directions is somewhat limited, or you have to recreate a dispatch center. And you see that in big disasters where they'll literally recreate a dispatch center. That's not the same as having an existing dispatch center that already has everything you need. In the idea of getting from all risk management standpoint, you know, when you're near a tarmac, you're near an airport, that's normally how you get things in and out. If you look at the fire community, when they operate large-scale wildland fires, they typically co-locate the helibase right next to it, and also it's part of how it works. You know, we live in that world. We could draw you much more specific. Again, we're kind of ahead of ourselves. One of the things we can do with any existing space, wouldn't have to be there, is we can have a computer model with certain parameters. We can fill up space with pictures of consoles and how it looks based on just what we have, and demonstrate it a little more clear if that answers the other questions.
So council, I'm gonna throw in another suggested approach. Again, we talked about some next steps, and it sounds like there is some council interest, and I think if I were to make a recommendation on the way to go about next steps for the 1010 building, I think the first step would be seeing if we can come together on lease terms and ultimately at least achieve a tentative agreement on lease terms. If that at the end of the day is successful, I think the next step would be that capital budgeting and the operating budget. And I think as you get into that capital budgeting, you're going to find that there needs to be a design component where some of those exact square footages, some of the basic needs, even some of those wants are evaluated, looked at, and determined whether or not we can afford to move forward with some of those. But I think the lease would probably be a first step. Is this even feasible to negotiate something that ultimately would be acceptable for the long term for both the county and the city? And then following that, start moving forward with some of that budgeting. But just if that's helpful, that would probably be staff recommendation on how to move forward. Of course, we've heard a lot tonight from council about some of the desires relative to terms of those lease negotiations. Those are appreciated. There's continued council input on those terms relative to lease negotiations. We'd love to hear about them.
I do think, I appreciate what you're saying, Mayor Brooke, about longevity and what's our best case scenario. And my concern is that we have an option now that all of the staff involved feel really good about. And if we say, essentially, go back to the drawing board and come back with your perfect building, and we find that perfect building doesn't exist, we've just essentially decided that we probably can't afford to build it. And then we end up potentially in a situation where we don't even have a best case scenario with what is currently existing. Anyway, so my concern is that we just start the process over and we miss a window of opportunity. I don't think we need to move quickly through the process, even if we decide tonight to say, let's move forward with exploring the 1010 building and what that would look like based on Manager West's recent recommendation. I think we could still say, you know what, this isn't gonna work, but it seems worthwhile to to make some action tonight to allow staff to move forward exploring that option. Because at this point, we haven't given them the authority to do that beyond what they've already given us.
Can you make a motion to make that happen?
Sure. I move that we authorize Manager West, staff.
That would work. We can delegate other stuff.
Okay. I move that we authorize Manager West to begin the process of exploring a lease agreement for the 1010 building to house the joint EOC and other, and PENCOM and other activities as laid out in our memo.
Second.
So further discussion on the motion.
So, one of the things I would just like to say is I will support this motion. I do appreciate the port having that sense of community responsibility with regards to offering this facility for this use. And, we all need to recognize that we have 2 city-owned properties that score high with regards to location, site security, survivability, leverage, that would be available, in the case that these terms could not be negotiated in a way that we are satisfied with. So those are reasonable options that I don't think we need to discard at this point. But recognizing that we are making decisions for ratepayers and taxpayers, and those prices matter. So I don't want to the perfect be the enemy of the good. I want to stay grounded and not look at, what's the best possible structure that we could construct when we do have an opportunity to save money for taxpayers.
Lindsay?
I was just going to say, after we pass this motion, I think we should also request that the city bring financial comparables for one of those others, just so that we have a good sense of, how much we are saving with the lease, with all the financing taken into account. So that's a discussion after this motion.
Ideally also along with, potential bare bones financing plans, including like what grants could be available. Because, we want to look at apples to apples.
And so, I too do agree that this next step is important. I still, not that I want an ideal, but I want absolutely some square footage that makes sense. And I'd like to see exactly, for PENCOM, we will, use 7,000 square feet. Right now we have 6,000 in this new building. As right now, if we say we get the 1010, we are gonna use 7,000 square feet. That means that leaves this much space for fire and this much space. So that's something that we should know today, truthfully, because now you know what the square footage of that building is. So I'd like to really know that. I also agree with Mike about the other 2 sites. I don't want them dropped from the options. I know the lease is something that's gonna continue, and if it's successful, great, and if it's not successful, then we have options. But that's, I'm not convinced about the financials yet, and so I would love, again, to get some true financials as to rent versus, ideally not going to debt, but other financing possibilities, so. All right, so with, anything else? So we got a motion?
Madam Mayor, if I may, I would just say I appreciate the additional comments. My suggestion would be that perhaps a separate motion identifying some of those things might be appropriate. Again, I think they probably coincide with the capital budget exercise that we've talked about. And I think if we want to talk about some specifics, and perhaps if council wants to do a second motion after this first motion, that might be helpful in identifying this.
Wonderful, thank you. All right, council, we got a motion on the table, and a second. The motion is to go ahead and continue, at least begin the lease negotiations, at least figure out whether this is going to be viable or not. So, any further discussion? All those in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? So it passes unanimously.
So I'll move to request the city manager to bring back to the council financial plans for the 1010 building and either the vacant city property on 18 or the city property on 16 or both.
Second.
Just a quick question, clarification on that. We don't know the terms of the lease, so we're just using a ballpark based on what's been presented tonight. It's just a clarification.
This could happen in any order relative to the motion, just saying.
Okay.
further discussion on that? All right, all those in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That passes unanimously as well. All right. Well, so we got some handful. Thank you all.
Thank you all for coming.
Yes. It is now 7:52. We want to take a 5-minute break. 5-minute break, come on. So I'll be back here, it's like 8 o'clock. All right, council, we'll get back on track. And I guess I want to note that Councilmember Kidd is not called in, so she must be caught up in traffic. So we probably need to excuse her from the meeting.
So,
Second.
Any further discussion? All those in favor of excusing Councilmember Kidd, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? So it passes unanimously.
It's an honor she wasn't here. She missed the lively conversation.
She's gonna be on King TV tomorrow morning,
Oh, fun. Very cool.
morning show, so she's spending the night in Seattle.
Seems reasonable.
Yeah.
So, staff, or is there any late items to be had? Yes.
This is kind of reverse of that trend. I would, in the interest of time and maybe efficiency, I'd like to make a motion that we move items number I3 and number I5 under other considerations into the consent agenda.
I have no objection.
Neither do I.
I actually do, because I know that the city manager put the evaluation form on your, on outside, so we can actually get a little discussion happening. So, I would prefer to.
Just I3.
Yeah, just have to.
That's fine.
Okay, so we'll move right here. All right, anything else? Any other late items from staff? Nathan, any late items?
No, yeah,
Okay, so let me read the consent agenda. City council minutes for July 2nd, 2019. Expenditure report from June 22nd, 2019 to July 5th, 2019 in the amount of $3,079,612.35. The Rainy Well and Support Building Re-Roof Project, WT0118, bid rejection. The facade and sign contract number 1903A and 1903B for Harbortown LLC. And then the International Association of Firefighters. Is that?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay, International Association of Firefighters, IAFF local number 656, union contract.
I move the consent agenda as read.
Second.
All right, any further discussion on any other items?
Just like to say thank you to the negotiating teams on both sides for the union contract. I know that's been a lot of hard work.
Yes. All right, all those in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? So it passes unanimously. Thank you. All right, so let us go to the hearings examiner rules and procedures. Attorney, you want to read this one's yours? Or not? Oh, not Allison?
That was surprising me, but I'll handle it. So, my life right now. So in front of you tonight, the intent of what you see here is we recognize that we didn't have rules of procedure for our hearing examiner. We adopted or implemented a hearing examiner program in 2014, forgive me. And it was actually a suggestion made by our current contracted hearing examiner, who is also doing that work for the county, County. And so the intent here is just to have rules of procedure in place, not only for the benefit of the hearing examiner, but for the public and for the applicants, and just really to provide a little bit more of a defined process for those for those types of projects that are seen by the hearing examiner. Pretty clear. So I'm here to answer any questions you might have on the actual language.
Any questions?
I thought they were really good. I'm just curious, how do people find out about the roles?
That's a great question. We certainly could provide a copy of them at the meeting, would probably make sense. Otherwise, I think we rely on just educating each applicant as they come in. We tend to talk about just what they can expect and do
do it more just in that style, but we could certainly have a copy available for public that's attending so they know how the meeting would be organized.
So we haven't established rules for how to distribute the rules, but our plans, we have a plan. But our plan was that people will come in, they'll say, I want to appeal this, and we will receive their paperwork from them and probably give them a copy of the rules at that time. So that, and we will also have it on the website.
Yeah, that's what I was wondering, if there was a place for people to know how to appeal, that it would fit right in there. Okay. All right, folks, so there's a resolution with this one. Let me read the resolution. A resolution of the City Council of the City of Port Angeles, Washington, adopting hearing examiner rules and procedures. How do you want to move forward?
I move to adopt the resolution.
Second.
All right, any further discussion?
I have one quick note, which I brought up with Manager West already, and it doesn't need to be addressed right now, but just something, because it's in code, that would need to be addressed. But just on the section 2.3 filing, under 2.3.2 timeliness, it's the only part it's the only section in the whole document that doesn't articulate what kind of days it is. That was just a note that I made. Everywhere else it says it's a calendar days or business days, and that one section just says 15 days. So at some point, as we move forward, maybe clarify that, but it doesn't.
Council, the distinction that I shared is quoting directly from code. So rather than change the municipal code to say business days, it's just verbatim from the municipal code. And Attorney Gore might want to correct me if I'm wrong.
So in our code, we usually just follow the state rule. The state rule is that if it's 5 days, it's 5 business days, it's 7 days or longer, it's calendar days.
Okay.
That's just statewide.
Thank you for the clarification.
In our code, we usually just follow.
Okay, thank you.
I'd like to commend our deputy mayor on the detailed reading job that she did to find that.
Sure. Well done. All right, so we have a motion on the table and a second. Any further discussion? All those in favor of the motion, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? It passes unanimously. All right, so the next one is going to be the deadlines for enacting local health fund taxes to take advantage of House Bill 1406.
So Mayor and Council, I'm going to start off on that staff report. I think it's really important to recognize that as City Council and ultimately staff, we implemented this year some legislative priorities, and one of the top priorities for us this year was housing, making sure that we approached the legislators and let them know that housing was our priority, making sure that we asked them to provide tools of how we could actually implement additional housing opportunities in Port Angeles. And I think the legislature followed through with doing just that. They have provided to us a tool. And I think the importance of bringing this to your attention now, I recognize that at your last meeting, we did have a think tank on this issue. We didn't get specific directive to move forward, but I will tell you the timeliness of it is very significant, that if we're truly going to get it done within the legislative deadline, tonight's meeting was pretty important to be able to present to you the resolutions, both for the sales tax 1/10 of 1% option, as well as the sales tax credit. And details are in your staff report. But I want to emphasize the value that this money could provide, and that ultimately it could provide some significant offsets to those challenges that we're seeing in the development community right now to actually construct housing. In some of those cases, we're seeing really significant changes in the requirements for infrastructure, whether it's stormwater infrastructure or other infrastructure. I think that presents an opportunity for us to find revenue solutions through this mechanism to actually resolve some of those issues, ultimately working with some housing developers, including the Housing Authority and others in the community who are actively building housing. I think that's going to be extremely important. But I think it's also important to recognize that the City of Port Angeles has been hard at work for quite some time in trying to resolve the housing issue. We have a lot of ground still to cover. But I just want to highlight some of the things that Director Brecky's department has done to really work towards eliminating regulatory barriers, as well as ensuring that housing projects receive some of the funding that they need. So if you look over recent time, I think it's important to recognize that the city was a funding partner in 2 different Wildwood Terrace Community Development Block Grant projects. We were also a funding partner in the Maloney Heights project with CDBG funds or Community Development Block Grant funds. Also co-sponsored the Sea Ridge Phase 1 project done by the Peninsula Housing Authority. It's important to emphasize that accessory residential units have seen quite a few changes from a regulatory perspective on how easy it is to do them now, including an administrative approval where you used to have to go to planning commission to get approval on those. Director Brecky also oversaw changing the medium and high density zones that results in an additional 1,160 square feet for every single medium and high density property, additional developable area that previously couldn't be used based on zoning regulations. I think too, highlighting the fact that we've developed 5 different overlay zones that allow for and provide flexibility of development, including cottage style development, including infill development. There's a lot of flexible options that have recently been built in. Reductions in residential parking have already occurred, reducing the number from 2 per unit as a standard requirement to 1 per unit for those with 1 bedroom or less, as well as the ability to count on-street parking for that second additional parking space. Those were very recent changes. I believe Director Brecky oversaw those in 2017. And then ultimately, parking spaces are also now rounded down, whereas they used to be rounded up. And all of those have implications for housing costs. I can tell you, Council, I could create a much longer list, but I want to emphasize the dedication the City of Port Angeles has already attributed towards housing and how critical housing is to the success of our community. And I think as you've seen the resolutions presented for you this evening, I think that will further some of the goals. And I think the sales tax option is the right option, recognizing that we don't want all of the obligations on our local taxpayers, but we want to ensure that those costs are also shared with those that are visiting our community and adding costs to our community on a regular basis. So I think that's pretty much the staff report I wanted to share. Attorney Bloor may want to supplement that staff report and add additional information relative to what's necessary this evening to get that moving forward.
Nathan's provided a very good overview, and I don't have very much to add. I will say, the reason we are providing this tonight is the structure of 1406 allows the city to tap into some additional revenues specifically for affordable housing. The structure of that is that you're required to meet 2 deadlines. One deadline is by the end of this year. The second deadline is by the middle of next year. And that seems like, oh, it's a long ways away, plenty of time. But in fact, one of those deadlines involved an election. And so tonight actually is the last regular city council meeting you have to meet the deadline for the November 5th general election. And so that's why we are presenting to you, if you want to move ahead, at least you would have the option of meeting that November 5th deadline. And of course, there's some advantages to that. The main advantage is the cost is much less, and that's a big consideration anytime we're considering these actions. So the cost of putting a ballot measure on the November 5th election is much less. Also, you get generally better voter turnout, which is supposed to. So if we don't meet the November 5th general election, it would have to be either the February or the April special elections that would be available for the resolutions. And if we don't meet those, then we don't meet the deadlines. I'd be glad to answer questions, but I think between what Nathan said, that will fit. We've pretty much covered the obvious things.
And I think I'd like to just add as well that we got this as an agenda item as well, because we did have the discussion that we had a little bit of time if we went to the April ballot, but the cost is what really kind of, the cost of between 7,000 to 12,000 if we went for this November election versus the 70,000 if we went to April, made it a absolute necessity that we take a decision, tonight. So that's why we're also saying this. So with that, council, is there any questions, any discussions?
So first, I appreciate staff moving nimbly on this and getting on our agenda tonight. I apologize for the short timeline. This isn't something that I kind of tried to spearhead after the AWC conference, where we learned about the nuts and bolts of House Bill 1406 that the legislature passed this previous session here. So I have a lot to discuss, I feel like, and I can do it all up front, or we can kind of have an open discussion. It's up to everyone else. But there's a lot of questions I think that the citizens deserve to hear our answers. I'll just list a few of them. For me, what is the problem that we're trying to solve is a big question, because it's easy to talk about affordable housing and be really vague in general and not get into the nuts and bolts. And I have a lot of specific nuts and bolts of my diagnosis of the problem and how, and then the next question after that is, how would this solve the problem? In medicine, they call that the mechanism of action. And so, what are we doing to try to solve the problem? Nathan already kind of delved into quite a bit of that. And, both from a staff level and a council level, we, I think, have shown that we are interested in taking some of the criticisms of the development community seriously and try to do what we can to ameliorate those. And then, with this new tax revenue, how is that going to solve our problem is the big question. And what specifically are we going to do if the citizens authorize this tax revenue? I think is something that we should discuss as a council. Because again, it's really easy to be up on that 10,000 foot level and vague. And I think that our citizens deserve to hear from us our ideas on what we would do specifically. And then, the big one, the other one to me is, how is all of this consistent with what our experts that we've hired have told us? Because we have a housing action plan that is not, the perfect. You could take a lot of time planning, never doing something. And so, we have some good data, we have some good recommendations from experts, and we also have some good citizen feedback from that process, where our citizens have communicated some of their, feelings to us. We got, I think, a pretty decent response rate for a survey, and so, those are kind of my general questions to start with, and we can shape this discussion however we want. But that's where I'm at. I have answers to all of those that I would love to talk about.
All right. See Jim at the top.
And I'll let you talk about those, but you're more into that than I am. And guess what I'm going to talk about?
The money.
The money. Good. Show me the money. Actually, what I'd like to make sure that is the mechanics of how this works is clearly understood. First of all, this is a sales tax increase, and it is not a levy. A property tax levy was an option under this law, but the staff correctly, as Nathan pointed out, chose the sales tax increase route. So again, this is a sales tax increase of 0.1%. In other words, our sales tax will go from 8.7% to 8.8%. And so that has to be, I think, very, very well defined. Second of all, we, as a council tonight, are not imposing the tax. What we're going to vote on tonight is send the decision to impose a tax to you, the voters. We're voting on resolutions to put this on the ballot. So the voters ultimately will decide whether they want to impose this tax upon themselves or not. And I think that's the appropriate way to handle this. And so again, we are not imposing the tax on the citizens. We are asking them to impose a tax upon themselves. All we're doing is setting up the mechanism for them to do that. And I think that's got to be very clear. Thirdly, is the actual mechanics of the tax and how it works. How they write these things is, first of all, Mike and I were talking this morning about how the .0146 part of the resolution came to be. And we actually have a .00073, but that's a one increment. But we are going after 2 increments. So if you add those together, even I don't even need my HP to do that. We come up with a one. But here's the critical point I want to make here, and forgive me for belaboring this, but the .0146 is not a match. It is a credit. It is a credit against future sales tax due. When you have a credit, it's not applied until you create a liability. Just like if you're filing your own tax return, and you have a credit, like a saver's credit or something like that, you can apply that towards the tax liability that you have. So the delta between 8.6 and 8.7 creates a tax liability, and that tax liability is where the credit is applied. That probably makes no sense, but on the other hand, I want to make it perfectly clear that this is not a match, it's a credit. And the good thing about a credit is a dollar for dollar offset against a liability, as opposed to a deduction where a deduction is about a 20% offset against a liability. So, if you hear people referring to, oh, we're going to get matching money from the state, that's not correct. We're getting a credit towards future sales tax liability, which means we simply get to keep that money rather than sending it on to the state because we owe them the 8.7, but of that 8.7, we're going to get a credit that we can keep. So it is real money because it's collected, but they're not matching us, they're just letting us send less to them. Does that make sense? Okay, so that's the mechanics of it, and I want to be really clear on how those mechanics work. I'm not, no value judgment here. I'm not saying that's a good or a bad mechanism. I would have crafted it a little bit differently from an accounting standpoint, But the other thing that's important to understand is there is a sunset provision in this. This credit lasts for 20 years. Now that may seem like a long time, but as far as sunset provisions go, it can catch up quickly. So we, future government bodies, need to make sure that we're not caught asleep on the sunset provision of this because it's 20 years in the future. Mike and the rest of you can address, we're going to write you a check now. I've figured out how we're going to write the check. You guys decide and tell us how we're going to spend it. Fair enough?
Yeah.
Anybody else would like to pick up on this?
Well, there are some pretty specific things that we can spend this on. So first, addressing the credit part, the House Bill 1406, which came about this year through the state legislature, and talking with one of the state legislators at the Association of Washington Cities Conference, she was saying, we understand that local governments, cities and counties feel a need and have a need to be able to invest in affordable housing to help address the affordable housing crisis. So that's where the heart of House Bill 1406 comes from. That's the credit part. And then they also said, but we think if local governments specifically put some money in themselves, put some skin in the game, so to speak, that we will double their money. So that's the reason why this is so timely right now, is if we do one of the options for local qualified tax, which is this sales tax for affordable housing, then we can double the amount of money in credit that we'd be getting back from the state for the next 20 years, which, according to the numbers that AWC sent out a little while ago, and assuming those stay the same, we're talking about $575,000 over 20 years of free money from the state. I mean, it's our sales tax money, but we're getting it back. So that's the doubling thing that makes this a timely measure. I heard from one constituent saying, well, address vacation rentals because those are taking away housing stock. And I think my answer is yes and. We need to do that as well. And address vacant houses that aren't being lived in. Yes, and the reason for this right now is the timeliness of it. It's the fact that the state legislature has said, if you understand the urgency of this problem and have in place a local qualifying tax by mid next summer, which for our purposes is another election, is the best time to ask the voters for that, then we will double the money that we give back to you under House Bill 1406.
All right, so, and the one thing I guess I want to caution us all is that this is exactly what we asked for the legislators to do. They did it. They're trying to help us out with affordable housing. We have a housing assessment that tells us we need, what is it? The numbers are a couple hundreds of houses that we really desperately need. And so one of the things, like I said, that I would hate to have this bill go out, ask the voters for this and then not give them the education they need to know exactly what they're voting on. Because if they don't understand it, and if they don't understand our current community's need, I think it'd be easy for them to say, I don't want to pay another tax. And so with that, I want to say that I think it behooves all of us to talk about this, to make sure people are well informed about this, and so that it has a good chance of at least having folks vote on it on its merits, rather than just on not knowing and not wanting just another tax.
I'll let you go ahead, Mike, and give us your answers.
So, my first question, what is the problem we're trying to solve? And we've already alluded to that, and it's a problem of supply issues, where we have not seen the same rate of unit development that we saw in previous generations, especially in our city. And this is a problem that the entire nation struggles with, and different areas are approaching it differently. We've seen a huge amount of building, especially with multifamily units in the city of Seattle, and as a result, they've seen a year-long decrease in the average housing costs. And so, some people see that and they're like, oh no, you're ruining people's investments. But what you see on the 50 years, you see a huge spike and then a teeny tiny little averaging down. And so the point is that, in Seattle, they built and that lowered costs. That's a success, on those terms. And so, in our city, if you walk around, you see in some of our older neighborhoods, a lot of multifamily housing units. You see little apartment buildings, you see duplexes, triplexes, and you generally see them aging. And you generally don't see a lot of recently constructed multifamily housing units from the private sector. You see specific examples of Peninsula Housing Authority doing some, and you see Peninsula College doing some. And so, we need to increase the number of habitable units because we are probably going to see a lot of those units age out of usability of the older private stock. And so our issue is supply side. Our housing needs assessment talks about this, about the number of units we're going to need to, create a reasonable supply to bring costs down. And they go through different tasks on what are we going to do to get that happen, and those tasks are really great to read. The one that, specifically caught my attention was task 8, to establish a Port Angeles Affordable Housing Fund. And so that's really what this sales tax would go into, is a housing fund that we could then ideally have multiple funding sources for. So one funding source is the 1/10 to 1% sales tax, one funding source is the 1046 funds from the state, one funding source is an allocation from the real estate excise tax, could be allocations from general funds. There's a lot of ways we can put this. So that affordable housing fund is in our housing action plan as a task. And we are one of the, if you look over on the right side, it says who's gonna do this? The city council is one of those people. So, when we talked to AWC, one of their number one points that they made over and over is use collaborations. If you have this tax revenue, if you have a qualifying local tax, get in touch with your nonprofit community, other governments, to make sure everybody's on board to make these things happen. Because as I've talked privately to Nathan, one of the points that he made, which I think was a great point, is we don't want to become another government version of Peninsula Housing Authority. We want to use the assets that we have already in our community to do this, to build the supply to solve the problem. And so, you know, specifically, how does that look in different other tasks? Nathan's already talked about some of the ways we're trying to do that, but our own housing action plan says, here's some things that you should do. You should implement incentive zoning. You should implement non-cash offsets and cash offsets. And earlier in the action plan, let me find it real quick. They talk about a demonstration project, and they talk about some urban, they did a housing cost analysis on a hypothetical, I think they actually used some projects from Bellingham, and they analyzed how would some of these cash offsets reduce the cost of development for these large mixed-use or multifamily projects. And they found that if you used a multiple, using density offsets to make it so that they can build, with those flexible zoning tools, if you use cash offsets for impact fees and some of the other development fees, building fees, you could reduce the overall cost if you used all of these, by 10%, 12%. If you used combined, those, you could reduce the cost by up to 30% to get these developments to pencil out. And so that's really what we're saying is we can help these private developments pencil out. We can get partnerships with the housing authority to make their developments happen faster. And this is consistent with what our experts have told us that we need to be doing. And we asked our community what are the most pressing needs, and all of these things line up. And so I think this is an opportunity that we need to take. We need to ask our voters, and ideally, we can make a real dent in the housing issues that we see around our community if we can get some of these projects rolling.
I move to adopt a resolution of City Council of the City of Port Angeles, Washington, providing for the submission to the voters of the city of a proposition to impose a qualifying local tax of 0.1% pursuant to RCW 82-14-530 for affordable and supportive housing.
Second.
All right, any further discussion?
I just didn't feel like it was necessary to repeat what everyone was saying, but I will support this motion. I think we have heard consistently in public comment, we've heard individually, and when we're out and about from constituents about the incredible need. And I really agree with Lindsay, it's the both and I think we would be remiss in not giving the voters an opportunity to help us take advantage of a mechanism that the legislature has created, so.
Any further discussion? Okay, all those in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Passes unanimously.
There's a second resolution on the same issue, which is moving forward with House Bill 1406, so that's on page 27. And so I move to adopt a resolution of the City Council of the City of Port Angeles, Washington, declaring its intent, authorized by House Bill 1406, first, to request a credit for 0.0146% sales tax, and second, to impose a qualifying local sales tax of 0.1% pursuant to RCW 82.14.530, both for affordable and supportive housing.
Second.
All right, so we have a motion on the table and a second. Any further discussion?
And just to clarify, this resolution is our statement of intent that we plan to ask for the House Bill 1406 tax credit, because the amount that we get is, well, it gets really confusing, I guess. Because the county can also ask for that credit. If we don't, it's important that everyone knows who's intending to do it, so that the state, the county, and the city all know how much money we're talking about. So the way House Bill 1406 works is, if we think of it as two shares of state tax credit, if we and the county both ask for it, we each get a share. But if we, specifically as the voters in Port Angeles, pass a local qualifying tax, we double our share. That's the way that we propose in our locality for affordable housing is the county passes a resolution before the end of January to accept House Bill 1406 tax credit. We pass this resolution as we're doing now, and then the voters in November pass a local qualifying tax in the city, and that's going to maximize the sales tax credit that we get back from the state, as well as provide that local qualifying tax revenue as well.
And so,
Oh, go ahead.
okay, so I do have a question, because I know the second part says to oppose qualifying sales tax, and we haven't opposed it or we haven't voted, the voters haven't. So I would suspect that, and to oppose the sales tax after the voters have approved it, right? I mean, so when I read this, I thought, well, wait a second, we can't oppose it until the voters pass it, so.
This is a resolution declaring our intent. That's how I interpret the reading.
Okay.
If Bill wants to chime in too.
If I could speak to that, I think that this really is up to the voters either way. If the voters vote no, then it's probably not going to be in our best interests to ask for the 0.0073%, because that just won't be enough money to do anything meaningful. And so that means we probably won't move forward with the next step of this second resolution, which is, which would happen before July next year.
Also, just my understanding of the clarification is that what we're saying is we want to request the 0.0146, and the way that we're going to do that, the qualifying tax that we're choosing is what the number 2 is stating, that that's the mechanism that we're going to hope to do in order to double that.
Okay. And one of the things I want to do with this resolution, because I just thought it was so well worded, so thank you for that. It says, and whereas the city of Port Angeles is experiencing a shortage of affordable housing, and whereas many people are paying more than 50 or 60% of income on rent, and whereas Port Angeles people are living in places not meant to be housing, such as cars or streets, and others are on the verge of homelessness, and whereas the revenue generated by the provisions authorizing House Bill 1406 provides support for people who need it the most. And goes on. But I thought that really states it well, so thank you.
And one last comment just on this general topic. What we're proposing here is to go as far upstream as we can and to solve the root cause of the problem, which is that people cannot afford housing. And by building more housing, we can stimulate markets to bring costs down. And so, it's really easy for people to get frustrated at the progress that we've made because so much of the problems downstream have bad solutions. And it's really hard to swim upstream. And so I appreciate that this is a bold step that we're taking, but we are actually trying to solve the problem at its root. And that is going to be expensive, and that's going to be time-consuming and difficult, and it's really going to require all those collaborations that we've talked about. But I think this is the thing that will solve the problem.
All right, folks, anybody else? So we have a motion on the table on a second. All those in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? It passes unanimously. Thank you. All right, so we are on to the rural development initiatives. And so this is one of the items that came back from AWC. It says all of Washington Cities, it's Association of Washington Cities Conference. And so RDI was there, they presented, they talked about the amazing classes that they put together to grow leaders and to grow businesses. And so just kind of like what Mike Skinner's presentation was, because I just feel like those things just go so well together. What RDI said is that we need to be invited to come to a community. And so I left them my card and I said, hey, we want you here. And so they called and they said, we would like to be here. The dates that they want to be here are August 26th to the 29th. And one of the things that they need to know is who should they meet with and who should be partners. The idea is that the trainings for the people who are going to take these classes, because it's a long-term commitment, depending on how they structure their classes, but it is free to the people. They do the fundraising, they do the grant writing, they identify the foundations. They may need some of our help to try to identify some of our local foundations. But the RDI, the Rural Development Initiative, they will do all the fundraising. So what they asked me was, again, who should be our partners for this? Who should we talk to? You know, is it BEDC? Should it be, SBDC? So because there's so many potentials, I thought it would be ideal to see if we could just set a little subcommittee and have folks work on it.
Just to clarify, I had the chance to talk to the RDI presenter before her presentation. I didn't get to go to her presentation. But what she said is that they look for about 25% of the people participating are people who think of themselves as leaders already. Then they're looking for about 50% of participants are people who would never identify themselves as a leader, but they are. And so part of it is about that. And then they're also looking for 25% young people, youth, involved in these trainings as well. Is that what you got out of the workshop?
Yes, and I love the fact that it was, you can have a grandmother in there as well as you can have a high school student. And that seems to be, and then at the very end, the whole group puts together a project and they make it happen. And so it becomes, they want to grow vitality in the city, and by having a project that everybody works together and they figure out how to get the funding and they figure out how to make it happen, it teaches people how to do things. It teaches them how to create a difference and make a difference in their own community. And now they have a cohort that they can turn to that has gone through the exact same experience. So I think that it seems to be really successful. They started this in Oregon with a couple of communities that were forest-based industries, and when those forest-based industries started to collapse, this is what came out of that to try to help innovate things. And so they've been hearing about Port Angeles, and they wanted to come here. So they are coming here, so I think this is a great opportunity for us to get them together with that Center for Inclusive Entrepreneurship. I think, like I said, the missions are similar. One may be more geared to business, the other one is business and leadership, truly getting action to occur. So I don't know, what do you guys think of identifying some folks who could get together with these folks on the phone to figure out who they should come to, what their August 26th or 29th visit should entail?
So are you looking for us for council to form a subcommittee, or for us to give you some ideas of people that would be on a subcommittee with you to do that? Just for clarification.
Either. I mean, what these folks need are a really good list of people who would be excited to do this. And that would give them a really good idea on where some of our, like I said, potentially local foundations that could help them, and also finding these people who would be taking the class and maybe, and I don't know about identifying the project, I'm not sure how they do that. I think that's from within.
So a couple people I guess I would think of would be Christy Smith, anyway. And maybe Mary Barkey at, was it Rose Club? I'm not saying her last name correctly. And maybe my sister-in-law, Emily Dexter from Food Bank. Just think she engages with a lot of people in the community in different ways. She's also in the Rotary and has some good connections, so.
And I know that I talked to her, just off the cuff was, things like the EDC and folks who are, the chamber and Mark Abshire. And so, and I'm actually thinking that maybe Mark Abshire might be the person to kind of lead this little subcommittee, but I don't know if he wants to do that or not. But again, I just wanted to, before I get back to them, I wanted to see if anybody here is interested in doing that as well.
I'd be interested, I'm not sure I have the time. But if you want to put me on the short list for now, okay. And I don't know that, certainly I could participate, well, I shouldn't say certainly. If I have time, I'd be happy to participate in the subcommittee to help identify the people to participate in the event.
I know that this is happening, I'm happy to help brainstorm people who might know people who might want to participate. Again, I'm not sure that I have the time to participate in any of those.
Okay. And I know that, I looked at my calendar, I can shepherd them around to all these different places and you know, do the introductions and things like that, so that's not an issue, but identifying the people, I think, and what the agenda might look like is what that really needs some help with. So, okay. Any input from staff?
I think staff can certainly discuss at the meeting tomorrow. I think there may be additional individuals that staff might want to identify to participate, and we'd be happy to share those.
Okay.
And just to reemphasize, the emergent leaders, the people who don't think of themselves as leaders, and also young people, that's a key part of this program, and I think it's important, and I'll lose track of that. When we think about kind of people who are already in institutional leadership position, like nonprofit directors.
Right, and actually, these are just folks for them to meet, to understand the different organizations that could help identify those other folks. So it doesn't mean that these guys are going to be participating in the training. It just, they want to get a good sense of where this community's at, and yeah. Okay, well, thank you guys, I appreciate that. All right, so moving on to the city manager evaluation form. So,
That's fine.
Just super excited.
Good evening, council. I have two things to present tonight, but you moved one up, so I appreciate that. Thank you, by the way. So for this, the city manager evaluation form, you guys remember that the contract between Manager West and the city, there's a stipulation that there was going to be a written evaluation in September of 2019. And so what I have worked on with a few of the council members is to come up with an evaluation form. And so tonight that form needs to be approved by you. It's attached and it's included in your packet. And really just needs to be approved so that we can use it in the evaluation in September.
any comments, questions?
I really appreciate staff, and I think some council members may have helped with this as well, so thank you so much for taking the time to put into it. I have two comments, I guess one is a question. And first, I don't want to nitpick language, but because it has something to do with how we work as a council with the city manager, I thought it's worth mentioning, which is under governance, the fourth one down, execution. It says, possesses the ability to follow council direction despite possible differences from his own views and successfully executes their policy or directive. Each successfully executes its policy or directive, because only as a single council do we set policy or directive. We don't do that as individual council members. And I find that Manager West does a really good job of that. When I'm trying to twist his arm privately, he says, you know, that's something that I think the council should give direction on. And I say, he's right. And then I try to, hop on up here. So just to make sure that that's clear, that it's there. And then the other one, which is more of a question, is moving down to page I-67, it's under section 4, resource management. There's two sections on, there's several sections on personnel. And I am not entirely sure when I read over those how I would assess those, given that I don't want to be in the details. For example, taking the second one, mentors, department heads to assist in further development and maintaining their performance standards. I don't know how I would assess that. So I guess I'm looking for the folks who are involved in writing this. What do you want me to do as a council member to be informed about that? Because to some extent, I feel like my job is to supervise Nathan, in this case, the city manager, not to supervise his supervision, even though, of course, his abilities as a supervisor are part of his performance of the job. So I'd appreciate some guidance on how I should fill those out when the time comes.
That's a very good point, and I know that, so this one, sadly, is a little bit of a camel, right, when we were trying to do a horse, because there was forms from AWC, and then forms from MSRC, that, I don't know, I guess it was from the City Managers Association. And so, and the idea was to have, making sure that things fit. So, what has happened is that it got kind of melded together. So I know one talked about some of those things and the other one didn't. Jim, did you want to pipe up on that one? On page I-66, personnel under resource management number 2?
No, the only thing, guidance I would give you is remember that this form is, we're viewing this evaluation from the 10,000 foot level. And as long as we maintain our altitude, I think we'll be fine with the form. And guidance, Lindsay, just give it a 3.
That's almost gonna make that joke.
Well, and I guess to me, for council is just to know that you also do get a chance to interact with department heads. And so you will get some sense of how some of that stuff's going. But it is, you're right, it's kind of hard to do that. But knowing that you as council that are going to be here long term are going to see progression of growth in staff. And you'll be able to note some of that and have some conversations with some of the staff. But you're right, it's hard to, sometimes it's hard, but if you didn't see that growth in the staff, then this gives you a place to be able to note it. If that makes any sense. So usually, most of the time you won't even notice it because staff is growing and changing and moving up but if there was a place where you saw that there was a deficit, I think this allows you space to be able to come. All right. So
Just to comment on Lizzie's language change, I feel like its and their are synonymous in that usage. That, it's a pronoun, in place of council direction. Their policy, council policy or directive.
I was reading there to refer to council rather than council direction. Certainly council direction would be plural, councils should be singular.
Okay, so it's singular.
Yes, right, because
I
it's
understand.
the action of the body, not the action of individuals.
Having gone through that wordsmithing, I'd like to make a motion to approve the city manager evaluation form as attached.
Second.
all right, any further discussion? All those in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? It passes unanimously. Thank you, council.
Also, I just want to say thank you for the time that went into that, and I want to thank Patty as well for the work that she put in.
Yes, thank you all. Really appreciate getting this out the door. All right, so with that, we move to council reports.
Well, this is my busy week. So everything happens after tonight. My other committee meetings, although we had UAC. And we unfortunately lost one of our UAC members, who was representative from McKinley, because that's a designated position on UAC. But the good news is that we lost him as a member of the UAC because he was hired by the city. So we're excited about that. I think he's going to be a good addition. And his time on the UAC will serve him well in Public Works, so that's good. And I guess related to council, not a whole lot of other stuff, but I spent the weekend for the first time as a traveling baseball tournament parent. And it was exhausting, but fun. So I suspect I will be doing that a lot more going forward because my son was sold on the process. So
Lindsay?
So I'm gonna share two things and then make a plug for some policy change that is almost done and we just need to finish it. So first is last month, the National Low Income Housing Coalition published its 30th anniversary out of reach report. And in that, they found that in every county in the United States, somebody earning minimum wage is unable to afford a two-bedroom apartment. So it's not just us, it's everywhere. And I think that's, this telling challenge, for what we need to do around affordable housing. Coupled with that is another kind of update. This is from Community Solutions, which is one of the organizations involved in the functional zero methodology for ending homelessness. And Lake County, Illinois has declared that it has reached functional zero for veteran and chronic homelessness. Basically, when people become homeless in that community, they're very quickly identified and they find housing. And they find support. So it's just a different way of working, and it's working out in several different communities. I first laughed when I read that our homelessness task force goal was to end homelessness in Collin County, and then after learning more about what other communities are doing, I started laughing about it because we can and we should. It should be an emergency, just like the 9/0 earthquake that might happen 300 years from now. Or it might happen in 5 minutes. So, let's do that. So then the final thing is a plug on something completely different, which is we got an email from a constituent saying, look, I'm walking downtown from between the bridges because the taxi smells like cigarette smoke, and why can't I take an Uber or a Lyft? That's early in the morning, the bus doesn't run. We have a draft of the Transportation Network Company ordinance. My understanding is we've just been waiting for a return phone call from one of the Transportation Network companies. If we're not important enough for them to call us back, they're not the only in town, we should pass that anyway. If they finally get around to calling us back and saying, hey, we need you to change theirs to its, then we can amend that ordinance. But let's move that forward so that the other TNCs can figure out how to operate in Port Angeles and provide more choices for transportation. That's all.
So I attended the Olympic Peninsula Tourism Commission meeting. It was a little work session that we did with just the partner agencies. And it was a really great meeting. We talked about the possibility of running ads and buses in King County and Pierce County as a commission, which would be nice to see the city of Los Angeles through Vertigo or the remnants of Vertigo do some more partner ads with them. I talked to Nathan about that. We heard from Ryan and Lane at Blackball that they're looking at doing package deals with the Straight Shot from Clallam Transit. And then we had a really interesting long discussion about the role of public transportation in our tourism economy, where the Jefferson County people are so jealous of our transit agency because of the Straight Shot mostly. And so that was a really good discussion. But props to Blackball for innovating and having some really cool products that they're giving to our tourists. I've been speaking with Ryan Lynn, he had the quote of the meeting. In my mind, we were having a discussion about how we talk to our tourism economy, to our citizens and in public. Often there's a lot of focus on living wage jobs in the tourism economy because we don't necessarily have the same wage multiplier that other economic sectors have. And that's the thing that I should have brought up when we're talking about entrepreneurship, because that's the way to get that high wage multiplier, and so that's a really integral thing. But Ryan Lane said, what we need to be talking about is that tourism is the tip of the investment sphere. That as we increase our product to meet the needs of our tourists, we all get to benefit from that increased product. And then we also, the Tourism Commission showed a little video that I'm going to show everybody, that they partnered with this guy. He has, I think, a PBS show and a YouTube channel called Eric the Travel Guy, and they produced this really cool app that they're showing. Not an ad specifically, but.
I love it, the fact that our councilman reports are not going to be, video, and this is good. Good.
Today, we're in Washington Washington State. And for the next couple of minutes, I'm going to show you around the Olympic Peninsula. Let's go.
The Olympic Peninsula is located in western Washington. It's the large arm of land situated across the Puget Sound from Seattle. It's bound on the west by the Pacific Ocean, the north by the Strait of Juan de Fuca, and to the east by the Hood Canal. The Olympic Mountain Range is in the center of the peninsula, and it's home to the highest peak, Mount Olympus. Small towns dot the drive around the Olympic Peninsula like pearls on a string, each having its own special vibe. And there's a culinary loop to follow for scrumptious seafood like Dungeness crab and farm-to-table local cuisine. You'll find tasty beverages on the cider route around Port Townsend, the historic Victorian town with a long maritime history.
Those of you wishing to up your Olympic Peninsula getaway, well, I suggest a two-nation vacation, and here's how to do it. Stay here in Port Angeles for at least a couple of days, and then take a day trip right over Victoria.
It's safe to say you will need a car when you're here, and simply driving around will give you a sense of perspective. This is a large peninsula, and if you're curious where to start, I say start at the Olympic National Park.
If seeing is believing, then my friends, consider me a believer.
It spans nearly 1 million acres with 73 miles of coastline and represents 3 distinct ecosystems in 4 different regions: glaciated mountains, subalpine forests and wildflower meadows, temperate rainforest and rugged Pacific coastline, and they're all beautifully present.
When to visit is always a consideration when planning a vacation, so I can give you a little insight. Peak season here essentially runs from Memorial Day to Labor Day, which is over the summer months. Shoulder season, of course, you'll find those in the month right before summer and a little after. One of my favorite times to visit Olympic Peninsula is in September or October.
You're probably going to need a little help planning your itinerary, so head over to the area's official tourism bureau at olympicpeninsula.org. Trust me when I say you're going to want to see as much of the Olympic Peninsula as time allows during your visit. A couple of my must-dos are hiking at Hurricane Ridge, which showcases a stunning vantage point of the area, and exploring the vast Hoh and Quinault rainforests that are among the great wonders of the Olympic Peninsula and offers plenty of opportunities to practice forest bathing, which has wonderful health benefits. Seeing all the incredible beauty of the towering trees, flourishing forest life, and haunting moss-covered trails will simply take your breath away and allow the pulse of nature to flow right through you. This is real rejuvenation.
So I was thinking, we may have run out of time in this video, but the time is now for you to plan and take your next unforgettable vacation to the Olympic Peninsula. I'm Eric, the Travel Guy. That's what I got.
So yeah, that's cool. I also attended the Peninsula State Town Association. We had a lot of talk about traffic safety and a frank discussion about the future of PMEIA funds that was helpful. And then I went to a Chamber Emerging Opportunities Committee. Our Chamber board meeting is this Thursday, but at our Opportunities Committee, we had a really great discussion with a lot of the big players that are looking at downtown investment and talk more about those next steps. They're gonna have, I believe, another big July meeting with all the downtown, people I think that someone from the city is gonna be going. But we also discussed the potential of a floatplane dock in Port Angeles, which I know has been brought up in the past. And the idea is still in its infancy, but we had some good discussion about next steps. And then speaking of the chamber, I personally spent the 4th of July downtown. It was awesome. There was something to do everywhere you were, so the chamber just, I think, had a wildly successful event with just awesome stuff happening everywhere, live music, great food, fun stuff to do. For kids, for old people, it's great, so.
Thanks, Mike. You're now officially an ambassador of the Olympic Peninsula.
Yeah.
And by the way, if you're downtown Port Angeles, stop in the Hagen restaurant. So 2 things that I have. First of all, on July 8th, I attended a broadband planning committee meeting. And this broadband planning committee is actually made up of the NODC, the Port of Port Angeles, the SQUIM, Port Angeles and Forks, and also Clallam County. And so this group has come together to make application for a CERB grant, CERB grant, to do the research and planning to bring high-speed internet broadband to the Olympic Peninsula. The port is taking the lead in the sense that they are drawing out the interlocal agreement among the participants, and the city of Forks has also joined us. I don't know if I mentioned them or not. And so we're drawing up a CERB grant. Karen from NODC is actually putting together the application, which will be submitted on the 29th of July. And then the city, or I'm sorry, the NODC will administer the CERB grant, and we'll put out an RFP for a vendor, if you will, to do the study and come up with a plan on how to, in other words, we need to find out who's got it, who needs it, and how do we get it here. And so that's what the purpose of this planning committee is, and we felt that all the major players in Clallam County felt it would be better if we pooled our resources and did it together rather than each one of us try to apply for one. It made sense to do so. The Port of Port Angeles is drawing up the interlocal agreement, which I provided to our city manager to review, and so the grants that go in, application will go in before the interlocal agreement is signed. So you'll probably see that before us either next meeting or shortly thereafter. Again, as you know, high-speed internet is no longer a luxury, it's a necessity. And there's an old expression, a luxury once enjoyed does become a necessity. So this is a way of us on the Olympic Peninsula to get together and collectively make this happen. So I'm very excited about that, and we'll keep the momentum going on bringing high-speed internet to the Olympic Peninsula. I'd like to also indulge you for a minute and talk about a little personal note. Mike mentioned the 4th of July. My wife baked 15 dozen cupcakes for the kids' fair. And the day afterwards, she was feeling very ill, and I was kidding her about all the powdered sugar that was floating around the house. But unfortunately, she continued to feel pretty poorly and was getting sicker. And all through the night, she was having distress. And finally, about 5 o'clock in the morning, we called the visiting nurses line, and after 2 questions, they told her to immediately go to the emergency room. Just a little tip, if you have to go to the emergency room Saturday morning at 5:30 is the time to go. So, and there was nobody there. And so anyway, but what happened was she had a very infected gallbladder. And so the emergency room took her in, gave her a CAT scan. The surgeon, they called the surgeon in, and Dr. Atkinson, he came in, immediately advised her because of the critical condition of this gallbladder that it had to come out immediately. So she went directly from emergency to surgery, and because of the deterioration of the gallbladder, they had to put a drainage tube in her for the weekend. So I say all this because I just want to express my appreciation and gratitude to the folks at the Olympic Medical Center. The treatment that she received and the way I was kept informed of the progress. And you know, when you don't know what's going on and they've got tubes hanging out of your spouse, it's very frightening. But they were very compassionate, and they were very, very understanding. Hats off to Dr. Atkinson, he did a wonderful job. And they do this new laparoscopic surgery where they just put 3 holes in you and they just take it out. And so the recovery time is great. I'm happy to report that she's doing well and recovering fine. But again, my point of this story is I just want to make sure that I express my gratitude and appreciation to the staff at the Olympic Medical Center for the way they handled this entire process and the way they treated us for the weekend. Julie and her staff on the second floor of West Wing was great, comfortable all weekend. So we have a wonderful, wonderful facility there, a wonderful asset for our community, and again, personal experience, but I can't tell you how much appreciated and the gratitude I feel for this soil.
And I was grateful to see her today. She was walking around doing well, so.
Yeah.
I was on the fence about whether or not I wanted to say anything, but I do, following Jim's words of thanks. I think it's worth acknowledging the really tragic and horrific death that happened in our community between this last meeting and this meeting, the loss of the Cambits family. And I really just wanted to say thank you to particularly, well, to everyone who responded, but particularly to our police and fire. You know, it's what they trained for, but what a horrible nightmare. And so I just really think it's important to acknowledge the work that they did and are doing, and to say thank you for that.
And I'd like to second that and to make sure that something like this is pretty traumatic for them. So to please take care of themselves and the community as well. This is just really hard. It's hard on everybody, and we're grateful that you're there during those times. So, let's see. Let me begin with Jim Waddell. I have a stack. Jim Waddell came and he has left us this Damned to Extinction, the video. So I'm hoping that, I know that I was not able to watch it, and so he said he would leave us a copy up there. It says, here's a little sign that says, you know, please sign it out with Sherry. And if you can get to watch it, I know that I've got family, I'm not gonna get to watch it in this next 2 weeks, but after that I will, so if you guys can get to it first, that'd be great. He also left the 4 lower Snake River dams and dam sense anthology. There's some more information if you wanted to get to this. Again, I won't get to it until after family leaves this weekend. Then I got some, and there's 3 copies of this stuff. It is on co-ops. It's a Yes magazine, How Cooperatives Are Driving the New Economy. And this was something that was actually taught at one of the compassion meetings as to food and cooperatives and how we make a huge difference in our community, because food is not a privilege. And so, and how do we get food everywhere, and can we start growing, you know, the discussions began with, can we start growing food in our right-of-way spaces or in places that, and then just kind of put stands up that people, if you have food, share it, and if you don't, so, and try to make the food bank a place that you don't go to the food bank because you need food. It's sometimes when the apples are in, everybody needs to take apples so that they don't go bad. So that was kind of the different thinking behind that. Anyway, but I'm gonna put this again on the dais for folks to take a peek at. Like I said, there's 3 copies of this Yes magazine on cooperatives, because I know that it's something that maybe we want to think about. Fort Townsend's being pretty successful with theirs. And also, they left a democratic by design, so that is on here as well for the cooperatives. That's from the cooperative end. The next thing was MSRC. So I went to the MSRC meeting. The interns are currently working because they usually have the summer time. We have 3 interns. They did the Pigeon Belmont survey, so they're counting birds. They're also doing the crabber outreach, so they try to teach. We lose, most folks who are beginning crabbing lose a lot of pots. And then these pots float to the bottom, and then they're continually catching crab. And so, and then the crabs eat the crabs, and then it's like, and it's a terrible loss, truthfully. I mean, it's just a crab pot collecting crabs. And so the MSRC helps to try to pick up some of these pots, and it's also teaching people how not to lose their crab pots. So, can't imagine them. So that's out there, and also they do a kelp forest delineation to see how healthy our kelp forests are. So at the next MSRC meeting, in August, I'll get you a clear date on that. The interns will do their presentations of what they've learned this summer. So they usually end up putting together the data and then doing some presentations. So everybody's welcome to that. The next thing, we went to Jamestown for housing. They had this interesting thing called the Perfect Little House Company. And what I guess the more I thought about this is, here is a set of houses So these folks sold architectural plans. But what made me think about this more was that potentially we could have this like for, whether it's ADUs or small units, where we pre-approve some of these designs and then it becomes a piece of cake to get them built. And that also reduces a lot of the costs. So Allison, this is all for you there. And then there was the presentation, there's a couple of more things on there. It was really interesting that the variation that you can have, the process of new urbanism was also something that, new urbanism is what, 30, 40 years old?
Yeah.
So, but it also goes back to form-based, where you can have something that looks like a single family home, be a duplex or a triplex, and it's just something that we need to move forward in there. So then, the last, let me see, a couple of more things. So I attended the Washington Trust for Historic Preservation. They had a youth program here at Elks. The youth presented, they had about 30 youth from throughout the state. They come here, it's, I believe it is free for the students. And the students spend 4 days in our Olympic National Park where they learn about historical resources, culture, and the environment. And then they're given interesting tasks. Okay, so if you were going to, say the Elwha River bridge, how would you align it, knowing that there's architectural artifacts, there's artifacts in areas that have been identified, how do you realign that? And so they're given some of these problems to solve, and it was kind of very interesting to hear them. They also mentioned at the Washington Trust for Historic Preservation the fact that the National Maritime Heritage Area has been approved. We're a part of it, and beginning in October, anything that we do should kind of point to this National Maritime Heritage Area because they might be able to use it for match funds. And so it's going to begin with them having to do a management plan, and then there'll be an implementation. But we can all join them under this big umbrella, and by being part of this, we can help each other with economic development, with recreation, and with cultural promise. So I'm thinking that when we get around to doing our, signs and heritage markers, that if we can make sure that we talk to them, then we can kind of participate in that. And with that is the end of my report. All right, so moving on.
So Madam Mayor and Council, there's a number of items under information for you this evening. Most of those I think are covered in the memorandums that you have before you. I do want to draw your attention that we did make a number of substantial changes to the council calendar that was submitted to you at the last meeting. We've made some adjustments and recognition of some work plan changes that were made, but ultimately everything's still on the schedule. It just got moved around a bit to accommodate some of the recent changes we did for this meeting. So with that, I think that's all we have for information, but again, council, thank you for the meeting this evening.
Can I just clarify, is there a work session next week, or is it just canceled for August?
There is no July work session. There is a August work session on, I believe, the 27th of August on vacant properties. So your next meeting is August 6th.
And I guess one of the things, to build in the next agenda, I think that alternative transportation ordinance, we might want to consider putting that on. It's that close.
The transportation network.
Right, yeah, the ordinance. All right, so, second public comment period. Oh, you are right there. Welcome.
Do I have 15 minutes? John Ralston, City of Port Angeles resident. Wanted to bring up, I did not pull the packet, I don't know if it was available online, about the Emergency Operations Center in PennCon Fire Department, but just hearing the discussion tonight, I think there's another location that was missed, at least one location was missed on vacant properties, and that might be Shane Park. Got plenty of parking, got a field to land a helicopter, got sewer and water, etc. There's also a person that's standing at the podium right now that has 4 parcels of land out near the 8th and I area. 3 of them are about 1 acre in size, and one of them is about 5.5 acres in size. They'd be happy to talk to the city about leasing or selling that property. The other concern that, at least, and I'm not a fire person or safety person, but my concern about the police or the fire personnel being located way out in the port of Port Angeles, the airport area, in their proximity to get back into the community to do their thing. Not so much for the EOC and the 911 people. 4th item, something was mentioned about owning or not, and I'm not reflecting upon the dollar amounts, etc. But I believe that the Westport building down on Marine Drive is actually owned by Westport through some negotiations, etc. The other thing on this HB 106, and it certainly is not clear, but thank you for not clearing it up. It sounded like on the credit portion, there's a 20-year sunset portion. But on the 1/10 of 1%, is there a sunset on that portion? No. So how long does that 1/10 of 1% stay in effect? Is it good for 3 years, 5 years? So I'm going to go back and refer to our Transportation Benefit District, which does have, I believe, what, a 7-year sunset or something like that. So I think it's important for us to, at some point, talk about if there is going to be a sunset on this 1/10 of 1%. Thank you.
Anybody else in the audience who would like to? All right, seeing none, I guess we are adjourned. Thank you all. Thank you for everything.